Okay, it's fucking it.
Okay. Should I start over? So this is the November 7th, Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. We've got Hunter Thompson and Alex Kelly here to discuss the 10-year telecom plan. I'm hoping to dig in a little bit more into the scope and the strategy, what's going on with that, and also perhaps inquire as to if any of the questions and concerns that were raised last time may have been incorporated or changed that strategy since last we met.
Great. Thank you. I'm Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity for the Public Service Department, for the record. So before we dive into the plan, and I'm going to let Alex take a lot of that as Rizzy is the one doing the plan, I will say that it's only been a couple of weeks and the first draft of the plan has not even been started, much less complete. So we did listen and we did take away the recommendations from the last JITOC that we were at. And we've been discussing as a group. We meet every couple of weeks to discuss how the plan's going and to touch base. And we've been discussing those recommendations and looking at ways that those can be incorporated into the plan. But we don't have any concrete, anything concrete to bring you to say, yes, on page 4 of the draft, this has been incorporated, because there's no page 4 of the draft yet.
I'll introduce myself. Nice to be here, everyone. My name is Alex Kelly. I lead the broadband team at Rural Innovation Strategies. I grew up largely in Springfield, Vermont. I live in Windsor, Vermont at the moment. And so as Hunter mentioned, we are deep into the process of putting together the plan. I'm happy to talk about where we're at in the process, if that's helpful, or answer any questions. I've got we've talked to a number of folks on the committee. We've been reaching out to various stakeholders to, as part of the information gathering session, portion of what we're doing. So we've done, I think, about 60 stakeholder interviews all told up until this point. We've got some more planned. And so I'm happy to go into any detail about what we're doing, what we're planning. I guess I'll leave it to you all to ask questions if that's how you want to do this.
Perhaps to start with, can you give us a little bit more information about the stakeholders and the scope of the interview and the plan on speaking with the information that needs to get parties?
Yep.
To create a plan.
Yep. So I would say that we're in the data gathering phase of the plan, and that means a number of things. We're interviewing, as I said, many stakeholders across the public and private sector, where we have surveys that are out in the field, some more specific surveys that are about to be out in the field. We're doing our data gathering and data analysis. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into the kind of data, the data collection phase of this. With the stakeholder interviews in particular, there's a number, as you all know, that are required in the statute across different areas of state government. We're trying to talk to representatives of the ISPs, various people from public safety to CUDs to legislators as well. And so, part of the goal of creating kind of actionable recommendations is understanding what the political landscape is and doing kind of a political landscape analysis, right? So the questions we're kind of asking, because we want to get to recommendations that can be acted on, right? Both because we've provided enough information in the plan so that people understand the options and where our independent kind of recommendations are leading us. But we also want to make recommendations that fit with the priorities of the entities that have jurisdiction over acting, right? And so some of the things that we are asking when we've been talking to the political stakeholders are, for example, there's been efforts over the past couple of years, for example, to put forward proposals to expand mobile broadband, which people call cell service, right, colloquially, right? Corey Chase put those forward, Clay Purvis put those forward. So we want to know kind of what was the perception of those in amongst legislators, why, or how was it considered, how was it discussed, what would make a proposal to expand mobile broadband more effective or able to be acted upon by the legislature, who would need to play a role in that in most scenarios. So that's the kind of political landscape that we're trying to ascertain with these. So when we talk to legislators, we just have a couple questions. So a few are about kind of mobile broadband in particular, because that's one of the focus areas of this plan. I can get into more why that's a focus area of this plan in particular. But it's kind of like, what would you need to be able to effectively take action on some of our recommendations, right? That would require legislative action. And then we ask open-ended questions, kind of the, what other feedback do you have about telecom planning and practices in the state? The classic, if you could wave a magic wand question. And that leaves a great opening for people to talk about particular aspects of telecom where they might know more about it. And so, for example, we talked with Senator McCarthy quite some time about public safety, because that was an issue that he had done a lot of work on.
With the October 19th FCC ruling changing things, is that creating much of a shift in your plan and strategy? And if the FCC changes it back and swings the other way, what kind of contingencies do you envision putting into the plan? So
this is, we have to obviously be responsive to decisions like that. This is something that we're, we have a lot of time, thankfully, before the first draft of the plan is due. So we'll be able to, test the waters and see if there's any indication of anything that might change again. But, definitely things like that change how we approach the plan. Again, as Hunter mentioned, we're still in the information gathering phase, so I can't, promise we're going to reference that in any particular way. But that's exactly, the plan is very expansive, right? It covers many, many telecom systems, and there are things that the state has jurisdiction over. There are things that this state doesn't have jurisdiction over, and sometimes that changes. So we try to, keep the plan current with the landscape, and be reactive to things like that. So the answer is definitely yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Senator,
can you remind me of the timeline you said and when we can expect to see drafts and then the final version, what the deadlines you're working around are?
Yep. So we have so as you know, there's a robust kind of public comment opportunity with this plan when it's in draft form. And I should have put it in bold. Oh yeah. So here we go. So a full draft will be made available for public comment in early March of next year. And as you know, public comment involves some in-person opportunities, some virtual opportunities, the opportunity to provide comment via the Public Service Department website, via emails. We're trying to make that as widely available for comment as possible. And then after that, a revised draft based on that public comment will be presented by June 30th. So that's the revised draft. So we want to definitely clue people into the draft for public comment in March as well.
One really quick. Sure. So tell me if this is not appropriate, but I'd love to know, do you look at other states that with their communications plans? Is there a state out there that has one that is a nice structure or otherwise that we are doing some comparison to, especially with regards to the characteristics of Vermont?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the 10-year telecom plan for the state of Vermont is fairly unique. And actually there was a study done, I'm going to forget exactly, maybe 5 or 6 years ago that the state commissioned kind of looking at that. Do any other states do it like this? I would say the main thing that we look at when it comes to other states is for individual subject areas. What are there any other states doing things that are, best practices that Vermont could learn from? And so things of that nature that we've kind of been looking at or prompted to look at include things like public safety answering points, right? how does Vermont's PSAP system compare to our regional neighbors? We've done work looking at, the next gen 911, E911 system that the state has. And, the state is kind of a early adopter of next gen 911, but not the first adopter. And so we kind of position it relative to what other states are doing.
The criticisms that here, probably more than anything else, about the 10-year telecommunications plan is that it's aspirational, but not measurable, or reported upon. Are you doing anything different this time to add specific measures, concepts regarding timetables, fixing responsibility for doing some of the things that's planned, and measures that go along with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So I think, here's how we're thinking about that kind of benchmarks and performance benchmarks, for example. So I think there's a few pieces to that, right? Number one is understanding how to measure against goals is really important. Some of the goals in statute are explicit about how to measure those, some are not. So providing a framework for measuring our goals is really important as the first step. And then second, making sure we're very clear about who has jurisdiction, and often that jurisdiction is shared, right, for advancing against these goals. And so if it requires a partnership between, different agencies, if it requires legislative action and then action by an agency, if it's out of the jurisdiction of any state body at all, right, we need to be very clear about that. And so you combine basically the way to measure against progress, against goals, and then the entity that has the authority and the jurisdiction to actually take action. So that's how we're approaching it with this plan.
Well, is there clarity so that if a goal is not met, that legislative oversight bodies such as ours can fix responsibility on individuals or groups who failed?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? Is there clarity?
Yeah, is there clarity in terms of fixing responsibility when a goal is not met, to be able for an oversight body such as ours to identify who is responsible for not meeting a particular goal? And it could be a group or groups, or it could be a process, or it could be a failure in our definition. But so as to, in other words, fix responsibility to know why, not just that we didn't meet a goal, but why didn't we meet that goal?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I talked about that, as Alex said, part of it is going to be identifying the entity with the jurisdiction over the goal, right? So that's going to be able to allow you to, I don't want to say assign responsibility, but to act within that jurisdiction and say, we laid out this goal, why wasn't it met? But the other part of that we need to mention is that there's going to be prerequisites to coming and meeting these goals. So that in addition to just assigning jurisdiction and saying these are the entities which are responsible to meet the goal, we're also going to have to go into detail about what needs to be done so that goal is able to be met. So I think with those two combined, you'll be able to find some points and some commonality to identify if a goal wasn't met, who can be held accountable, and see potentially the reasons that goal wasn't met, why either one of the prerequisites was not achieved and that prevented the goal from being met, or the entity or entities that had the responsibility in the jurisdiction to make that goal be met did not actually do what needed to be done to get there. So I think if we combine those two things, we'll be able to offer you some insight and, for lack of a better term, the ability to identify exactly where the breakdown was in meeting that.
So are you also looking at the statutory goals themselves to determine if those, based on your opinion and analysis, are A, the right goals or are realistic goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I can comment on that. So, one of the things we heard 2 weeks ago, which we have since added to the plan, is an analysis of statute, because there's different pieces of statute that are newer and older. And so we will provide an analysis of where statute may conflict with itself across, different iterations of that, but also where statutory goals may be in conflict in other ways, right? Strategically, achieving this might impact this one negatively or vice versa. And so it's both kind of look longitudinally about statute that's been put in place over the years, but also within statute, is there any conflict or potential conflict with pursuing multiple goals at once that could impact each other.
Are you also looking at whether or not there are federal or state statutes that hamper the ability to achieve goals? So as to, as far as state statute, consider revising those statutes to do that, or revising our goals as appropriate, or also looking at our contact with the federal government, identifying those things that may be impeding the ability to advance broadband and advance other telecom initiatives such as cellular, and we want to perhaps lobby on with respect to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the scope, and it's another really important part of the kind of education piece of making sure things are actionable, right? We need people to really fully understand the what we're working towards, why the strategy is the way it is, how the data supports that, and how the regulatory or statutory pieces may or may not make that harder or easier. And so unequivocally, yes, is the answer to that.
Well, this particular plan is one that gets revisited, as I recall, every 3 years.
Yes.
Are there measures, interim measures, or benchmarks along the way between now and then? In other words, we don't have to wait 3 years to know that we failed?
Sure.
Are you telling us or providing processes to help us understand what's happening as we go along?
I mean, again, we haven't finalized how we represent those types of benchmarks and milestones in the plan, but we hope that they will be appropriate for the type of processes that we're asking for, right? Telecom doesn't necessarily move quickly, but how various practices we might implement as a state are reflected in the plan and will be calibrated to basically what those processes will require. So again, I can't promise anything specific, but yeah.
It's just something that you're thinking about, hopefully.
Yes.
I'd like to go to Rep. Priestley and then Rep. Sabili.
Thanks, Alex. Knowing that Rizzi's working kind of nationally, and you, Senator Chittenden had asked about comparison to other states. I was just curious, has Rizzi done like a report on this scale for another state that we could kind of take a look at? Just I have not. This is my first time like having oversight over this type of this type of project for this like committee, and I'm just curious. Like, I'd like to. It's really helpful for me to like look at other states and then be able to like form questions and opinions off that.
Yeah, sure. So again, I perhaps should have said this up front. So as you may know, we have partnered with another consulting firm, CTC, on this plan. We are subcontracting some pieces to them, especially some of the technical pieces where they have very specific expertise. And this collaboration between our firms has happened in a number of other states, and where, for example, we might be a subcontractor to them. And so there's certainly a number of other plans of this scale that we've done across the country. But again, I would say Vermont's structure is fairly unique in that a comprehensive review of state telecom systems across all of the things that are in the 10-year scope. That's something that I think is unique to Vermont. And I think the study that was done 6 years ago kind of validates that. And so there might be a plan with a similar number of pages, let's just say, focusing on just one aspect of telecom, but the kind of comprehensive view is fairly unique to the state.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I was really happy to hear that you are going to speak to the potentially conflicting policies, or at least connecting policies. I think that is an area that is largely not well understood. The statute that this plan is being developed in response to, I'm not even sure when it originally was created. I don't know if Maria Royal has that information, but it precedes my time in the legislature, which was almost 10 years ago. And that was something aspirational for the state. an assessment of our telecommunications systems, a desired condition that we wanted to see in the state around telecommunications. Subsequent to this statute, which is driving the plan that you all are responding to, we've of course passed very significant legislation in Act 79 of 2019 and Act 71 of 2021. And now, of course, the job of building out has been assigned to the VCBB. And while it is still located with the regulator, the Department of Public Service, the developer is at the VCBB. And I'm wondering, of course, performance metrics for all the funding that is being spent in the state, those are going through the VCBB and the CUDs. And so I think Senator Brock and the auditor's questions around performance metrics are important. And of course, those are where we would find them. Will you be referencing those? Have you thought about how to reference the performance requirements for the CUDs for the funds that are going out?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the issue here, to Senator Brock's point about where there might be federal jurisdiction, is that the VCBB is operating under the framework established by the Infrastructure Act, which provided the money that went to the BEAD program, which has created the BEAD plan and all the associated documentation that the VCBB is putting together. So, and that documentation of basically how the state is going to spend that money and on what timeline is going to be published within the next couple months, which is obviously, again, parallel to, but actually before our work. And so I think we will see, once all that is out, what benchmarks they've set for themselves, because that's part of their requirements. But we don't really have jurisdiction over telling, basically dictating how the state can spend federal money that has its own federal kind of rules around it. So with that particular instance, we may simply, comment on or echo what's in the existing planning process being done at the VCBB, because there's not really anything else that you could do in that situation.
So let me just make sure I'm hearing that correctly, and maybe I'm not, but our current auditor is asking questions about performance metrics, which I think are important, how we're measuring success. A former auditor and member of this committee is asking similar questions. We have an old statute that you are responding to that is disconnected from the almost $500 million public infrastructure project that's going on. And so the performance metrics, many of us understand, are happening here. Not in the statute that you're responding to, but our auditor and former auditor are asking for performance metrics. So will you be talking about, we'll be pointing that out, that here are where the performance metrics are? Here are and I know that the auditor has actually weighed in very helpfully with the VCDB on some questions associated with this as well.
Yeah.
Is that helping to kind of shed some light here on the general confusion? I'm hopeful that you all are seeing where things are getting kind of mucked up.
Yeah. So I've talked with Christine about this, and we talked with the VCBB about the plan and the work that they're doing and how those things line up. And absolutely the VCBB plan is largely going to be not directly incorporated into the telecom plan. We're not going to copy and paste the BEAD plan and put it in the telecom plan and say, here it is, but it's going to be referenced, as the performance metrics that they put together are going to be referenced. Okay. And also the realization that I think the VCBB is under some performance metrics that are dictated by the feds in the BEAD money and by the NTIA. So they're going to have both federal performance metrics they're having to live up to, as well as what's currently defined in the end of the BEAD plans. But yes, we're going to make reference to that. We're not going to overwrite the BEAD plan and tell the VCBB that, no, we've decided you're doing it like this. Their plan is our plan when it comes to our planning.
Right. And you're writing the plan because of the old statute.
Because we're statutorily required to.
Right. So I do really just want to encourage you to really look into this. I'm sure you are hearing the confusion, which is, historical and, just folks not having all been on the same page. And then just really anything you can do to help and be responsive to this question of performance metrics, I think will be very much appreciated. I think we always want to be able to point to what the performance metrics are. I think we're asking for them on the plan, which is not necessarily appropriate with the old statute, but is appropriate where the $500 million public infrastructure build out is happening.
Mhm.
So if anything you can do to help clarify,
Yeah,
thank you.
noted. Yeah. Thank you.
Alex, you mentioned working with CTC. You know, that they were also working with Rizzy on the last 10-year plan. Are you revising that plan or are you starting from scratch to do the 2020?
Starting from scratch. Yeah, it's a completely new plan.
To speak to the previous question, really CTC has done this nationwide. You know, I think that last time we talked, they had done 13 or 14 states broadband and telecom plans in some aspect, whether they be localities, but localities that probably have the population of the state of Vermont or statewide plans.
Why are you starting from scratch and not building off of the plan that I see in front of me from June 2021 by the two organizations, RIS and CTC?
Telecom moves fast and there's probably some things we could reference, but you know, we're working in a completely different landscape now. And I would also say that the opportunity that, despite it being confusing that there's a BEAD plan happening in parallel and a digital equity plan happening in parallel, the opportunity that affords us is actually to go deeper and farther into different aspects of telecom that will be able to work in concert with the BEAD plan and the deployment of fiber. You know, for example, right, we expect, and the VCBB expects, that the resources we have available to us now will actually be able to achieve or come very, very close to universal fiber to the premise for on-grid premises, right? Knowing that that is in the offing and on the likely timeline that that's in the offing, that allows us to say, okay, what opportunities does that unlock for other different types of telecommunication systems, including mobile broadband, including various public safety related pieces. And so, you know, the focus of this plan, you know, with the certainty we have now, as opposed to 3 years ago, when again, we were working as Act 71 was being written, as the infrastructure bill was being discussed but had not been passed, right? The certainty that all of this gives us allows us to kind of plow new territory in a more, in a additive way.
Yeah. So Senator, I would just note that in the past, the department has come under really withering criticism from members of the public, from members of the legislature, in particular the Senate, for the quality of the broadband plan that the department had put forward, for items that folks felt were missing. And it's been my experience and what I've seen over the past few years that the department has given that heavy, constant criticism, had moved to recruiting a professional organization with a broad depth of knowledge and experience across the country to bring forward a plan. And so for some of us, it may seem like this is a little bit of overkill or disconnected from some of our $500 million public build. But that's my sense of how we have gotten to this place where we've got this kind of supercharged organization writing our 10-year telecom plan, which is kind of a unique unicorn across the country anyway. So.
So you anticipate addressing the issue of affordability in
Yeah, that's a big issue. It's very important. So again, we have to work in concert with the digital equity plan that's happening simultaneously and will be published ahead of time, right? So one of the things we're doing just to kind of calibrate how we can be additive to that plan, which is going to be released first, is we're maintaining close communication with the firm that's doing that. And so, you know, I anticipate us. So for example, right, we don't want to ask the same questions in a different survey that they're already asking about affordability. So we can leverage each other's work to some extent. But affordability, so our thinking right now, although I will say that this is subject to change, is that the digital equity plan by statute should focus on affordability for wireline services, which would then allow us to focus on affordability concerns relating to mobile broadband. And so kind of to cover all of our bases in that framework. But again, if the digital equity plan comes out and it's not, we feel needs augmentation for affordability concerns around wireline as well, we will happily do that just to make sure that the state has all the information and resources and strategies it needs to address affordability. And I think the other, I mean, just to perhaps anticipate a question, the other topic that came up 2 weeks ago quite a bit was competition and how do you measure competition and how do you benchmark competition and how do you support competition? And so that's just to assure everyone another major component like affordability that's part of this plan.
One of the items in statute right now talks about competitive choice. Are you seeing any issue about competitive choice, the way broadband is currently being rolled out?
That feels like an analysis that we'll include in the draft, but I might not, I might decline to give too many strong opinions about that at the moment. But I think in general, to answer that question, we need to present a framework for measuring competition. And then apply that to the state and then say, look, this is where we were, this is where we're going, this is what other states look like. So Matt.
In other words, that's your intent to do that in the report?
Yes.
So of course, Act 71 and Act 79 noted that there's a failed market. And so there cannot be competition in much of rural Vermont. And so put forward a plan for public broadband, which is different than what was originally envisioned in the statute and part of the confusion that we see right now.
Well, that goes back to the original question of, are there statutory changes that your work suggests we need to make so that we do have to?
And one could make the argument that with public broadband that achieves some of the goals that competition was meant to achieve. Right? Competition tends to bring down prices. Competition tends to improve quality of service. And so that will be part of the analysis of statute, right? How does the path that the state has decided to take interact with the statutory goal of promoting competition? And is there harmony there? Is there disconnect there?
Related to climate change and its effects on us, and we see the disasters coming fast and furious. How do you think your plan will address things like when a fiber breaks? You won't necessarily have a whole team of people running out to deploy that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, so there's actually explicitly pieces related to climate mitigation and climate resiliency in the BEAD plan that's happening simultaneously. Our organization, separate from this project, actually created a mapping and data analysis tool to look at climate risks as it relates to telecom. So we have extensive kind of resources and experience with addressing that. So how exactly that is incorporated in the plan, I can't say exactly, but more broadly, the goals of resiliency and security of our telecommunication systems, whether it's for mobile broadband or public safety systems, that's front of mind when we create our recommendations for how to improve on that. Because if you improve on that in a way that's not resilient to the increasing effects of climate, I mean, that's not prudent public policy. So again, I don't have specifics for you, but it's very much front of mind through a lot of this plan. How do you make sure that our systems are resilient or whatever risks they may face in the future?
Well, not seeing any additional questions. All right, thank you both for coming.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And if there are additional questions that come up, would you rather them go through you?
Yes, absolutely. Come to me and then we'll work them out.
Could you just go over the regarding timetable of the report, hearings and so on that need to be held and the like? So when is Staples?
Yep, yeah, so we obviously haven't scheduled the various hearings yet, but I can say that a full draft, as in complete full draft, needs to be made available for public comment in early March. And then between March and June 30th, we will be holding public hearings, soliciting out feedback in a variety of ways, and then with a final plan due presented for adoption essentially by June 30th.
And so the issue of legislative changes that pushes that off to the legislative session, the next legislation after.
It does, yeah.
Do you anticipate any preliminary information conceivably being available, even of what you're thinking about regarding proposed legislative changes? So that the legislature can at least think about those, recognizing they're not final, but and that may be from the department as well. So that if there's anything that we can do this year that can help move the ball forward, we have the opportunity to do so, recognizing that the final plan is not complete.
Do you mean prior to the final plan on June 30th, like for the March, for the draft?
For this legislative session.
We'd have to talk about that. I mean,
We don't talk about, the things that I don't think are perhaps working quite as well as they should. We all have been talking about, not just this year, but last year and the year before, about goals that aren't being met and are unlikely to be met. And the question is there anything that we can and should do about it, or should we just continue to wait?
we can certainly talk about that and figure out if there's opportunities in the process to.
Well, if there are, it would be very, very helpful to bring it to our attention sooner rather than later. We have some legislative deadlines in terms of getting legislation in to be considered, although committee bills can certainly be considered later. But my sense is if we do have a 5-alarm fire regarding some of these things, that we might start putting it out now rather than waiting a year from now.
Agreed. To that, I would invite both of you, if you come across something on fire, please let us know.
Public safety, very good.
Don't call on a cell phone, though.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And we're running a little bit early, which is great news and rare in this building. So I would like to offer Lisa the opportunity to start early, or if you want to wait for your time, whatever works better for you.
I just need that out.
Okay, sure.
Does anybody want to start?
I think I
Barely
can.
get a chance to use.
And Lisa, are you going to be doing a screen share, or would you like us?
Yeah,
to get something online?
Zoom,
Okay.
as long as I can get it to work.
Would that be easier for you, or would you rather us pull it up on our individual devices?
You could project you. I can project. You can bring it up if you want to. It's
Entirely
easier for you to see, but. Let's just see how this goes.
And
It's not letting me share the screen.
I'm going to, let's see, I'm gonna stop your video.
Okay.
Okay. You take over. That's where did you work in here?
It bumped me out once, so we might.
Being policy, you should get a share.
And Lisa, you've got two documents under your name here. We've got IT oversight summary from JFO and JFO project review process.
This one is I'm starting with the JFO IT project review process. And this is pretty simple, but it's just easier to walk along with the categories if they're in front of you. So for the record, my name is Lisa Gobb, and I'm the JFO IT consultant. And I'm going to start today for the benefit of new committee members to just discuss who I am, what I do, and how I review projects. And I will make this short and sweet. This is my third session here. So I've been here almost 3 years. And my role really is to review and monitor large IT projects. It's a part-time position, so I don't monitor all IT projects, just ones that are designated. And my work is really flows through JFO, Catherine Benham and Emily Byrne. They identify the different projects based on talking to committees that I should be reviewing and monitoring. And how it works, just go through here. There we go. So when a project's assigned, I go through a very specific project review. And this involves really the review areas that I'm showing. And it really is based on, is the project justified? Clarity of purpose. Is the definition of success established and realistic? Does the business fully support the IT project? And you can identify that based on the involvement of sponsors and stakeholders and how they've assigned the staff to the project. Is there a strong and effective leadership? Again, that's really the involvement of sponsors and programmatic and business folks. Project management. Is there a plan for effective project management? Is the project manager qualified for this? What's their level of experience? Are they creating all the project artifacts based on, in IT, there are different, they call them bodies of knowledge. So it's project management body of knowledge, very, very structured approach to IT that I think surprises people. When the auditor was here at the last meeting, the state auditor, he was talking about the auditors and their books and their, very precise standards. Well, IT has that too. And so there are recommendations for how you should approach developing an RFP, what type of artifacts you should have, and how you should document your business requirements, et cetera. So it's very structured. So you really want to look and see how they're responding and creating artifacts based on what the standard is. And then the financial consideration, is the funding secure and sufficient for what the project is? And the technology approach, is the implementation plan feasible? Is there any issues that I see with the technology? Is it secure? Are there concerns? Any types of those things. It's just varies so much based on the project. And also the risk management, our projects, risk being mitigated properly. So when I'm starting with a fresh review, typically it happens after the CIO does the independent review. And this is something that's required by statutes for all projects over a certain amount of money. And it goes into extreme detail, cost benefit analysis, staffing, all of this. So I'm a consumer of that specific report. And sometimes I follow up based on what I see. I have additional questions always. And then I start to consume all the project management artifacts that are appropriate for that stage of the process. So that's how a review works. And anybody have any questions, just feel free to jump in at any time. It doesn't derail me at all. The other things that I do are really, I do ongoing monitoring for projects. So today when I go through the status reports I group it based on projects that I'm monitoring. So they were previously done reviewed by my predecessor or by me at some stage. And then we're going to touch on a project that I'm actively monitoring, which is the unemployment insurance piece. I also can provide input on committee agendas if you're interested in that. And, you know, after being here for 3 years and hearing the questions everyone asks, I also can speak to patterns that I observe that could inform oversight and hold that thought, because I'll be talking about that in a bit. And I also review the annual reports that ADS produces to really see if anything, you know, what's coming up, what's new, and what projects we should consider monitoring that might not be on the radar. So I came to this role. I actually worked in state government for 17 years here in Vermont. And when I left, I was the IT director for it was the Department of Education at that time, where I had led various projects for a statewide data warehouse that the Department of Education shared with the school districts. And also, you know, really, I was part of forming the original team that was the IT team, because at that point, IT usually sat in the finance office. So it was really creating staffing plans based on those best practices that I talked about, you know, business analysts, data managers, all of that. So from the ground up, it's given me some really interesting perspective on where IT has been and how it's evolved. And from there, I went to work for a software company. I just felt like I needed new challenges. And I was an enterprise solutions expert for a line of business software companies. And what that means is it's kind of common areas and services that state governments provide: permitting, licensing, grants, those types of things. And so I led projects in multi-agency projects in Colorado and Massachusetts and Connecticut, and a big project for the Federal Home Loan Bank. So, you know, and all of those states had different IT governance structures in them, centralized IT like we do have here, and more federated models. And so I've seen the benefits and the pros and cons of all of that. And so all of that really does help me. And then after I decided, although I could manage profit margins pretty successfully, it just didn't feel right. So I went out on my own, and I did considerable time had passed, and I did a project for the agents, what was then the Agency of Education, really overseeing their integrated data collection and data warehouse that they were building. And that was this successful project, and online, and automated the collections of data from the school districts, many of them. So, and then now I'm here. But all of that whole path has given me some perspective, both on the state side, on the vendor side. And it's been very helpful to draw on that as I work for my new bosses, all of you, and help to give you some perspective. And really, you know, I have these guiding principles that I need to meet you where you're coming from. Not everybody here is a IT or technical wizard. And then even within IT, everybody comes from their various spot. So it's very important to me that if you have questions, you ask. And there's no question that isn't worthy of an answer if you don't understand that I'm not explaining it correctly, and I'm here to support you. So, and then also, I work with the state and ADS and the CIO. I think of them as partners, and the end goal is to have a successful project. And I do everything not to surprise anybody with a bit of information. And you'll see that later on especially when there's a project I'll talk about that isn't even at the review stage. It's too early, but I'm already identifying areas of concern. So I'm not surprising anybody. And it gives the state time to, if they need to come up with, you know, something they didn't have, it gives them time to do that, because we all want projects to be successful for the state. So let's see if there's, that's it for this section. Does anybody have any questions about that? And then I can jump into the reviews. Okay, yes?
Just one thing that we had talked about previously, it's something I'm concerned about and I've shared with you, in terms of cyber. So I've often wondered if we need, the legislature needs some sort of person like yourself on cyber that's not,
I am not a cyber expert.
Right.
And there's many certifications, and that's one area that is, it's a big deal. I think maybe an assessment, the first step I would make is look at how other states deal with this issue. And if there's any guidance on staffing that's done at the legislative level. If they just start with a general, would it be like a cyber audit on what is happening in state government, almost like an independent voice? Or if it makes sense to bring somebody on, it might make more sense to, contract with somebody to really look at specific issues as you go. But I think it could be very helpful to see how other states are dealing with this. And this sort of touches on, I know there's an interest in performance metrics and, is there a need to standardize that and for IT projects as well, based on some of the things we saw that the auditor found? It's just a different way to have a conversation, too, when you're in IT to start really, I do look at, do they have some factors that they consider levels, of what success looks like? And so I think in some of these places, it might be really starting at square one and you need an assessment to do that. And cyber might be an example of that. I hope that answers the question.
It was more just a point that I wanted to make. So
Yeah.
another place where this committee has some, purview over, where we could use some help, which is not coming.
Yeah. And
But would potentially be in a person like you.
And when I look at projects, I do consider the NIST standards. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, because they develop really detailed standards for different types of systems for security and everything for what's the best authentication, that sort of thing. And so when the state was talking about the statewide network and requesting funds this past session, for that, the first place I went to was the NIST standards for networks to see if they were going to adhere to the latest standards. And that's how I talk about that and deal with that is I don't have to be a security expert to read the NIST standard, but I think at what you're talking about, you would need the security expertise. And so NIST is there, just like your house, your builder doesn't have to know what, do calculations to figure out how big that sewer pipe needs to be. It's already standards that are developed that they just follow. And the same thing with IT.
Great.
Yes.
How do projects come to your attention?
Usually it could be if they start in the budget adjustment, if somebody's asking for money to, like an example was this past session, Blur's Buildings and General Services was asking for money for their WIMS project, which is their property management type system. And it was really to make up for operational money that they found they didn't have. So really they had me, do a mini look into that, what was really going on in the project, how was that going? And so it comes up usually around the budgeting process or when EDS produces their report of upcoming projects, which is typically in December. If there seems like there's something big around that, or there's big budget items or critical systems. So, unemployment, it actually serves a small number of people, but it's also very critical and it serves people when they're in some of the most difficult times. We're on an old mainframe. So, it seems like things with mainframe applications also are kind of raised up as they should because they present challenges for business continuity. So they can come up in any number of ways, but they're always assigned through JFO leadership to me where they ask me to look into something specifically.
But is there a process to ensure that no project is left behind?
Well, there's a lot of projects. And it's more than I could possibly do.
That's the other issue.
Yeah.
Is there a process to ensure that projects that should be looked at are not left behind? And is there a process to define what it is you look at?
I think it's really just defined on what do we see when we're looking through these lists. So sometimes it's a specific project. Other things that, if we note on looking at patterns, I've seen a lot of, projects coming forward that are using Salesforce. And, you know, maybe at some point when we have the bandwidth, we should look at how the Salesforce is being used, since it's such a critical piece of that state government is using. How's that shaping up? Is it successful? Are they finding that it's, you know, is it delivering on what they had hoped it would deliver? And those types of questions on the standard infrastructure. So with Salesforce, it's a configurable system. So you get it, and then you know, it's almost like using, it's not using code to develop the forms and all of that anymore, but it's a more of a GUI, easy to use interface without having to use code to develop applications that the state can use. And I think they were successful with it during the pandemic, and it really did provide a lot of value. But how is it long-term, and is the state still continuing in that direction with Salesforce? And, you know, there are other ones that were done on Salesforce, like a project over AHS, child, DCF maybe, I think it was DCF Salesforce application that seemed to have some problems. And why was that? So I do see things like that where I try and look for patterns and broader pieces, but right now they're just sort of brought to the, like, when do we have time to do it?
Is you have methodology to ensure that you haven't missed anything.
I think it, but it
Should
could,
has some mechanism to ensure, or at least provide us greater comfort that something hasn't been.
I think, well, in terms of projects, I would say no. In terms of assessing, having a standard way to assess all projects, to identify which ones specifically, really it's coming from members of committees, chairs, and our own look at what's happening in state government and what big projects are coming down the line. Like, it's sort of a no-brainer to look at the ERP system, because that's huge and it's critical. It's the finance system, it's vision. So that was definitely one we want to look at. We do use a structured approach, and this was developed by my predecessor, and it comes with pages of questions in each area, because we want to make sure we're approaching things the same way. And I have added to those questions. I haven't created categories, but for example, some of the themes that I saw, even just when I was first starting here and talking to members, was the lack of inclusion of stakeholders. Because you would all hear from your constituents, whether they're school districts or, dealerships in the DMV. And so you would hear from your constituents complaining that they weren't included in the project. And that's a big problem. So I included questions around stakeholder involvement. The other piece that I definitely have looked at is really, we have ADS, and they were formed to implement projects based on standards, right? That's why they were there. And so we really have to make sure when we see a project that are they following the standards that, exist for IT, because it's a very human thing to over time drop things off, and then it becomes a problem. So, even in an instance where you might, be buying off a different contracting vehicle, so maybe you didn't do an RFP, there are still artifacts that are recommended via the standards to be created before you do an RFP, that even if you don't do an RFP, you should have that, so you can make sure you're aligning the state's business requirements to the capabilities of the software. So, I think it's important not to become too focused on, not so much the bureaucracy, like, bulletin 3.5 and what were the review steps, et cetera. But keep in mind that they are controls. There's a reason for them. They're controls, like auditors have controls on money. So, for example, bulletin 3.5 is a state bulletin by the Secretary of Administration. It's been there since I've been in state government, before I joined state government. But it really requires competitive bid process and certain processes for procurement, and has a very strict review process for contracting and even RFPs. And it's not so much, that bulletin 3.5 is, the word from God. It's that it makes sure you go through the steps for a project. And remember the pin I asked you to, some of the trends that I've seen when I said put a pin on that one. It relates to controls and also how IT has evolved in state government here in Vermont specifically. And by that, I mean, back before ADS was formed, all the agencies had their own IT staff. And so me in education, if I wanted to do a project and do an RFP, I had to go through and, pull together all the business requirements and my business case and my cost benefit analysis. And I would ship that up to the CIO, and the CIO was the gatekeeper. They were making sure that all the agencies were adhering to standards for projects so they had a degree of success. Had they thought out all the financing of the project. So all of these things where you had to get through the CIO and say, hey, he'd say, yes, this is a good project, or no, you have to go back and adjust that. And when the independent reviewer was hired, it was hired by the CIO because, he was in a situation where there's a lot of projects coming to him from throughout state government. He didn't have the time to do a cost benefit analysis on every single project, yet it had to be done. And so this independent review would go to the state CIO, and then you would meet with the state CIO, the agency staff, and you'd go over the independent review and say, he'd say, you're short in this area according to them. You need to beef this up. You need to mitigate these risks. And so that's how it was. And now we're at the stage, and I don't think things just evolve over time and they happen, where we have a central IT authority that is now building those requirements and doing it to the standard that they feel will lead them to success. And then they hire the independent review to tell them what they didn't quite do right. And it just seems like, and I don't know what the answer is, but it seems like that, this gatekeeper role somehow seems a bit dissolved at this point. And which is why when some of the projects were funded, where we kind of have a caveat to the funding, like, okay, and it's because all the requirements that you'd normally look to assess the quality of a project and is this well thought out, they don't necessarily exist at the time when the funding's being sought. So kind of as a fallback, we say, okay, but you have to go to JITOC, and after you get the independent review, send it to Lisa and she'll look at it and she'll review the process. So in a way, JITOC has sort of taken that gatekeeper role in some way. And it's this is just an observation, because now you're reviewing these funding at this point in time because that information wasn't available upfront when the funding was requested. And in the old days, you never would have asked for funding without all the details. So that's just an observation.
So in other words, when you see JITOC being involved in the review process, part of that is JITOC assumes its responsibility to ensure that there has in fact been an independent review. The independent review is, call it favorable. Because I haven't seen the legislation being specific about that.
That was the fallback. And when I took this role, Dan mentioned this to me. He said, it's just a fact that when they're asking for funding, they don't have all of the requirements that typically need to be in place. And I think he was the first one to suggest for the phase one of the unemployment insurance that it come before JITOC before the funding was released. And I'm just pointing that out, that it seems like we've, without even knowing we were doing it, it's making up for this change in governance that's at the state level. That it's almost like JITOC now. And I don't think it's good for the state. And I don't necessarily think it's good for us, but it needs to be done if you don't have the information to say whether you should release the funds or not right up front. So this is an observation.
Well, I guess one of the observations to carry that to the extent is, are you comfortable that independent reviews, when they're done, are truly independent reviews?
The CIO is hiring the independent reviewers, and they're in kind of a pre-qualified bunch. I've never seen an independent review not mention something per se. That being said, the most recent independent review that I saw, I have a lot of follow-up questions on because I felt some of it was incomplete. But, you know, it's just, it could be my perspective. I have a different perspective.
And when you have those concerns about an independent review, what do you do with them?
I just, like what I did for the unemployment insurance independent review, I wrote a list of questions that I needed more information on and I sent it to the state and they'll respond by Friday. So that's what I do.
Have you ever had a situation where you had questions and that you sent them along and you haven't gotten the answers?
I've always been able to get the answers to my questions.
And have the answers always satisfied you?
Not always.
Do you think that when you have particularly these matters of concern that haven't been answered, that represent conflict, should you bring them to us?
I would.
That is something that.
I would.
First.
I absolutely would. And I would, the vehicle to do that would be my review.
Okay. On a slightly different subject, talked a lot about the reviews that you do of projects done by the administration. I assume if there were anything significant by the legislative IT, that you'd be involved similarly? Is that?
I have not been involved in legislative IT. I haven't seen any.
Sufficient magnitude. What about the judiciary?
Yes, I have. The judiciary network. I was involved in, and they came with a lot of information up front when they requested funding. And we required them to go through an independent review, though there's nothing in statute that requires them to do so. But they did that and they used the same, they drew from the list of vendors that the state has pre-qualified. So they did that and that was a very helpful independent review. And what was found there, they mitigated. And that is one of the projects that's under monitoring that I'll be reporting to when we go to our next step.
So do you, in effect, have the same mechanism to look at or to find about the existence of judiciary projects that would trigger your review? Do you have the same access to information to be able to know what those projects are that may be pending?
No, they don't report projects, but they, at this point, and they share things with me. And so it would generally be triggered if they're coming to us asking for money. Yeah.
I just wonder if legislatively there ought to be just some process to ensure that all projects that meet certain criteria, regardless of which branch of government initiates them, provide some form of notice so that whether it be this body or whether it be somebody who is associated with the money is able to satisfy themselves that certain criteria have been met in terms of independent review of the project before the money, and the key is the money before the money is obligated. That's something that I think our committee ought to think about a little bit. Along with council.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. There are some states that have auditor's office that have hundreds of people and they're doing more performance monitoring, but also more detailed monitoring specifically of projects. Timely. And California, one of the findings they had was that from the auditor was that independent agencies were kind of skirting around some of this. They didn't have to follow the same standards that were in place for the executive branch. Now here, ADS does allow independent agencies to utilize their services too. So I think if that happens, they can, but I don't think they're required. They're an independent agency. They're not required to go through ADS like the rest of the executive branch. But it was a finding that there were some weak projects or potential for weak projects or potential for security implementing an insecure application because they didn't have to follow the same criteria.
And that is something that we perhaps should take a look at.
Two additional questions on the piggybacking. Can you give me a general idea of how many independent reviews are being conducted in the state every year and how many approximately, what percentage of those come back unfavorable?
I do not have the answer to that, but I know probably 5 years fit on one screen when you go to their website. So yeah. So
And
probably half dozen, I would guess. It depends on the project. If
unfavorable.
Oh, no, I didn't say unfavorable. I think that would be a question for the CIO. I'm not sure she would know because she's new in that role too, on how many they really bounce back. I know just through informal discussions with her, she's been asking a lot of questions, more. I think just definitely asking a lot of questions of the independent reviewers and trying to up the standard there on what they provide.
The other really quick question is, you said that it's not mandated under statute for independent reviews of judiciary IT systems. Do you think it should be? Like, I know that they did it in this case because they wanted your approval, but do you think it should be mandated?
I think every branch of government should be required to do competitive bids and independent reviews. I used to like them because it actually makes you feel more secure that your project's going to be successful. And to have another set of eyes. I mean, I would ask other IT directors to look over some of our stuff if they were complicated, and we'd do that for each other when I was in state government. It's just a good thing. I mean, why wouldn't you want to do that? And why wouldn't you follow the recommendations? So. Are you ready to talk about some reviews?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have to. Do I have to stop sharing? And then reshare? Probably, hold on. Okay. Oops.
So this will be the independent review of state information technology projects, operations and organizations, right?
No. Oh,
The oversight summary from JFO.
oversight summary, yes.
Right.
Okay, so I am showing the document and I am down in section 2 because the first part of the document is really, this is what the document does, et cetera. So as I mentioned, this document includes monitoring reviews, so just updates on projects, and then an update on the unemployment insurance project, even though that independent review has just been completed. I read it, I responded, I asked questions, and that's where we're at. What comes next is I get the response to the questions from unemployment and go through all the documents. So I still have a lot to do. So it's an interim review, but this is the AHS review. So this project is really, really old. It's referred to as the IE&E project. And Dan gave me some briefing on it, but the business case goes back pre-2012. And it's one of I think this is the most difficult project in state government, easily. And it's been reinvented a few times, but I felt I needed to go back to the business case that was presented to the legislature when it was originally funded. And when it was funded, it was one of the main areas of the business case was that Access, which is a mainframe application that's now over 40 years old, was on its last legs. It didn't have very good documentation at all. It was just a kind of a mass of requirements and poor documentation. And they were, it was difficult to keep up. So this was the business case back then. And the allocation was somewhere between $9 and $10 million, I believe. And one of the things I noticed and I asked up front early on was how much the money had been spent, and it was not very much. But during my time in looking at this project, it's really been driven by, the work's been driven by either applications that were on, end of life and they had to be replaced because they were being de-supported. And also things that were out of compliance with the feds. But I also saw really some outstanding things, like during the pandemic, they had to stand up an application so people could apply from home and they didn't have to go into offices. And so they really were putting people first in that. But unfortunately, what they had, I mean, I don't know how else they could have done it in this quick a time, but they were collecting really images of the applications. So they get the images, download it, and then have to enter it into the system. And this is one of the things that is now out of compliance in terms of the Fed. I mean, it's most of the money is coming from the federal government. State does provide match. So these people are busy. They're dedicated. It's a good team now. They're here. We have Garth Walker. He's the IE&E program manager, and Mike Nagel, who's the IT lead for AHS. And what they're doing is, I think, through the latest works that they've done is the reason why we're sort of at this neutral stage. When I first started and I kept going back to access, people would look at me a little bit funny and, why are you asking us about access? And like, well, because that was the business case. Well, originally, and I really saw it was concerned that it was a risk that had been normalized over time. I mean, especially one of the first projects I did when I started was really looking at why Department of Labor and ADS said we shouldn't change the unemployment insurance application to implement additional aid during the pandemic. And so they looked, the ADS and DO said, we can't do that. It's just not a wise decision to change it. It's too old. And I went into the details, and I don't want to get into, when you start to talk about the details, then it touches in areas that you shouldn't really discuss. And I would never discuss just because it tells people about the system that it's just not important for them anyway. But after seeing policy, the inability to implement policy because of an old system, that is the worst feeling when you're an IT person, and also a pretty bad feeling when you're trying to help your constituents. So I saw this as, another mainframe, which right now it's unemployment insurance, DMB, and AHS access. So when monitoring this, I would ask them about access. And the issue is this team, although it was key to their business case and getting the funding for it, they're not the only program on access. And the other programs that are on access also use their data. So what this team did in an RFP that's being developed, and it's called VTIES, and it's the Vermont Integrated Eligibility Solution, right? So they're developing an RFP, and it finally removes the IE&E piece from access, but it also has to feed access. So the other programs have the data, but it's like the first step in a pretty important step in pulling away from access, which will be the state's last mainframe application. So the process that they've used to develop this RFP, which as I note here, it includes these reading glass things. I don't know how people deal with this. It's new for me. But it deals with a portal. Where is it? So it'll have online applications into a new access database. It's going to replace the legacy system for all IE&E programs. So, but even that, they still have to feed it. We still have other programs on access. But again, this was an important piece. This year, they're also working on an RFP for a notification solution, and that's based on a solution that was being, I think, supported over time. But they're improving all of this. This team is great. They've done a lot of great work on this particular project, especially. They've talked to other states. They've talked to vendors to develop this solution to make sure they didn't fall into any traps, and that they were designing or speccing out a solution that could be met by existing commercial solutions that were successful in other states. They've done a lot of work discussing these projects with other states, and they can speak to all this much better than I can. But so I moved this assessment to neutral because of this effort, but also with the VTIs, they're going to have to, well, they will be coming to the legislature for a request for more funding for the state match of this system. And I think at that point, it's a really good time to decouple this poor team from a business case that was developed in 2012. Because it's no sense going back and, continuously assessing the work that they're doing against an outdated business case. So I would suggest we update the business case. It's going to be a large project, so it'll fall under the requirements and require a state independent review. And then I think it should undergo another JFO review, and we can start fresh with our business case and a really clear path for how they will deliver the solution, and it's a 4-year project. So.
Do you have agreement on that path forward?
I think that's inescapable because it will be required to go through an independent review. And I've mentioned this at JFO, and I can't imagine they would ever say, don't do that. I think it's sort of a given that we would do that. The other piece that I don't think we should lose sight of is access. So IE is moving off of access, but they're still feeding it. I think what I recommend, and there's an appendix A to this that goes into more detail on this particular IE project, including their successes and what they've been working on. But I also make a recommendation that we consider asking for a report that would be due before next session, where we ask the state, what's the long-term plan for getting off of access, our last mainframe application? What is the long-term plan? And I know.
Could we make it a short-term plan?
Well, these are really complicated projects. So I think I have some suggestions on what we would include in that. And I know I've spoken to the CIO. She's, it's sort of of course we have to. It's, I think this project and access, it's more the outcome of having dedicated IPT people who have kept this up and moving and using it and programming in an old language that some, I think, and make it look too easy. It hasn't been a problem. And so I think this is sort of the result of that. So, but I think it would be genuinely helpful if we all had a understanding of what it's going to take to move off this old program and allow our IT people to work in the new technology and that. So.
Just to clarify, you mentioned or by next session, fire funds going forward.
Next December?
Like
No, not in 2 weeks, next year. I think it'll take some time. Sorry, Mike, you're giving Mike a heart attack. So I think, and it could be, but I think we need to start with that. But I did make that recommendation in the appendix. So does anybody have any, and IE is here, and I think they might be speaking with you later, with Denise about the project.
Yeah, I think we'll hold off on here. Guys, well, is that sound like your plan?
Yeah, it's going to be good. They have a great plan. So, all right. Moving forward, the DMV core modernization project. What a great project. They're doing great. They're on track. They're on schedule. They're on budget. I'm sure you saw the the information that they were shut down, but that was a planned shutdown in their offices to transfer into the new phase 1 system, the vehicle services. If you think about some of the criteria that I says project on, and you look at leadership was key here. Commissioner Manoli, fantastic job, deeply involved with this project from day one. And, they made it look easy. They found a great vendor with a great track record in multiple states, and they made it look easier. And she really is a kind of a force of nature in terms of leading her agency into such huge change. Everything they're doing is changing. It changed everything. And I think, I know she's, has spoken to labor about their experience because they're another agency that's going to undergo through dramatic change as they implement a new system. But just a fantastic project. So the second phase is due for completion in July 2025, and that hasn't changed. I stay out of their way because they're doing a great job, but I have access to their weekly project reports and I keep tabs on what's going on. And I send a note to Commissioner Manoli every now and then, and we'll chat about the project and sort of learn. But it's going great. It's wonderful, especially since the history at the DMV with they had some prior system upgrade attempts not succeed. So it's really great to see this. So, but it's also a lesson, I think, in when you have a vendor that has been so successful in other states, you really need to think twice about, think carefully about reimagining how you work and have some faith and go through the process of doing your reengineering. For example, you probably saw the note from the DMV that they're not putting the stickers on the license plates anymore after November 1. You don't need that. So, you know, in many cases, the state would put that in the requirements. You must be able to produce a sticker for the license plates because they've always done it that way. And sometimes reimagining your work in a different way, like, you know, I'm sure some were aghast not having a sticker on their license plate, but you know, it's all doable. And sometimes it's hard to reimagine your work. And when you have a good vendor that's been successful, it makes sense to really have some faith, hear it out, and really, you know, walk down that path. So, you know, because sometimes you can be just too stuck in old ways. So, but it's a great project. Any questions about that? Okay. The next one I'm monitoring is the oh, did you have a question?
Sort of incentive transportation, and I would echo everything you said. The DMV is known for being very bureaucratic, but Commissioner Manoli has really brought in a change mindset, a positive, flexible attitude, and done a lot of great things, even with the inspection stickers, making those now printable. So it's just really remarkable.
Yeah,
going in.
It truly is. She's been fantastic, and it was timely. We needed that type of leadership at that time. So. Around the judiciary network, this was the network, the money that was funded earlier this year in the previous session. And that's going really well. Their biggest risk was whether or not they could obtain all of their equipment because of there's some supply chain difficulties. But because they received money through the budget adjustment, they could spend money before the start of the fiscal year. And they think that helped them because a lot of organizations can't spend until after July 1. So they ordered all their equipment. They got that in early. As of mid-October, they were 75% done with the rewiring of the courthouses. They had completed the network design. They were doing pilots and rollouts. And I think they were using their own agency as the guinea pig, making sure the network was working properly. They're scheduled to be done by June of this year with a conversion. Secretary Riley Hughes mentioned some concerns about a high-risk area, which is moving. Really, it's the data off the state systems into the new systems because it's really complicated. And you think it's just copying, but it's not. I know a member of the Appropriations Committee who, when she was a Secretary of Education, lost all her email in an upgrade. So you think it can't happen, but it can. And so she had expressed some concerns. I know they've had meetings. I think ADS was concerned they weren't being consulted at the proper time or given timing because it requires work on their part too. So so far, that's the only risk I've seen. And I know they're meeting to minimize that. And I will keep you posted. But as of right now, it's going well. Okay, the next project, and I have all of the caveats you would want in this. Do not consider this assessment as final. There could be, I've read the independent review. I've submitted questions. There are some things in here that could be an incorrect assumption on my part. And I know you wanted an update on how the project was going. So this is what I came up with. And I also say, I do not think this project is going to stay weak. The areas that I've identified that I need more information on and the Secretary of ADS has agreed is around staffing. The staffing plans really weren't, they didn't name how they were going to staff the project, and the independent review noted this. But remember, both ADS and the Department of Labor, they were hit by the flood. They were kind of knocked behind and they're trying to get up to speed. And I know they wanted to still follow through and do the independent review, which started earlier this year. And they wanted a chance to respond to it. So I look at it like there's just more mitigations there's more risk that must be mitigated. That's staffing. The other question that I had related to the implementation plan, and none of this related to the vendor at all. The vendor is proposing that they implement phase one, which is the tax portion of UI first. Then they can go live with that and then implement phase two and go live a year later. So it's a 2-year project. Now, I don't have any issues with what the vendor can produce in a year. What I have concerns about is the mainframe. And given the state of the mainframe, is it possible to detach the tax portion and go live with a new tax portion and still have the benefits for the old mainframe still work? And because of the descriptions, and I worked closely with Sean Naylor when he was here, and he went over to ADS to do a multi-month deep dive on what was going on in the systems. So I just have concerns about that. And there's a reason why originally they posted a phase one RFP and then the phase two, and then they were going to do a phase two later. And then they decided we can't do that. We need to do them both at the same time, phase one and phase two, for multiple reasons. And so I have concerns about the idea of thinking we could go live with the tax before and not go live with the benefits at the same time. So really all that means is if that is the case and they discover the mainframe, yeah, we don't want to do that. We can't, go live. We have to go live for both at the same time. The worst that happens is the state tests phase one when it's done. Say, yes, that's done and we can pay the vendor for it, but not go live yet until phase two is done. So those are the types of questions I have. None of them relate to the vendor. The procurement process is still underway, so I don't want to mention the vendor because usually that's not announced. But it is a vendor that has a history in Vermont that's extremely positive. And they have implemented this in other states. I'll have more information on what states those are and who's gone live with what during my review. It was noted in the RFP. So really that's it. Well, yes.
So can we hear from from the agency here, department?
Yes.
Department here?
When the secretary won't be available until 11. And when she comes in,
They're coming in.
see the opportunity to present the projects and
Okay.
deeper dive.
They'll be here.
Okay, so can I then just ask a couple more questions
Please.
on this? So around project leadership, organizational support, clarity of purpose, so I'm hearing you say that's not a vendor issue.
No, it's really how the state, what the information they've provided via the independent review just seemed to be lacking and have some questions around. Again, if you don't have your list of staff who's going to be working on it, it's hard to see how committed leadership is. You know what I mean? Because you're not seeing any indication of who are they staffing the is this one guy in shipping that they're putting in here? You know what I mean? You have to really see who they are staffing the project with to understand. So all of that, and it was just more follow-up information and the financial considerations also. I didn't think the financial reporting on this was complete. And by that, I mean, just like DMV, Department of Labor received an allocation in their operation budgets to backfill positions while they're implementing this, but that wasn't part of the finance that was reported via the independent review. For all I know, the independent review wasn't aware of it. And I don't think that's purposeful. I think it's how people sometimes see what the IT project is versus what the business side is, when I see them all as, if it's needed to do the project, it's needed. It should be reported. So I think that that's missing. I also, from the assessment I had done during, when I first started, of the UI system, and they needed a lot of outside support for programmers to support them during the pandemic and the changes, and they were overwhelmed and all of that. The system was overwhelmed. I think I saw under other contracted services, it was under $200,000. So I was curious on if that was right. So I had some questions about the financial piece.
Under 200,000 for COVID services?
Yeah. Well, for, it could have been last year. So in other words, there were lots of questions that I had, but we're in the middle of the project. I think I described reporting on UI at this point as like giving you some insight into the sausage being made. This isn't unusual. It's just information that I have to track down, and it's not unusual.
So I really would like some more reassurance about that, because I was actually one of the legislators during COVID that was making calls because UL was overwhelmed. So I have some real sense of both the urgency of this project and, how it impacts Vermonters when these things don't work well. And a general sense of like, it doesn't feel like it's been especially well.
This is so early. I always have a lot of questions. So I want to give them the chance to respond and look at the time frame they thought they had to respond. Was it just the last year, which wouldn't include that? But I want more information, and I think we need more information. And I also have seen legislators talk about projects, and Senator Kitchell was mentioning last year, why doesn't the DMB project include the money for staffing too? Because we know we funded that, and why isn't it in this report? And I don't get the sense that anybody's trying to hide something. It just, they're like, well, that's in our operational budget. They saw it as something different. So I think, don't worry, we're going to get through this and we're going to get the information that we need. But it's normal to have questions. And it's also, I didn't want the risk of reporting an interim update to give you the wrong idea. The most important thing is I feel that they've selected the right vendor. They have a great track record, and that's most of it. This other stuff can be addressed. So, and remember, we're not deciding on that now. We're going to complete the review, and I'll come here with recommendations and data and answers.
Okay.
What's refresh our memories on what this proposed project timeline is?
It's a 2-year project at this point, and that was determined, but based on what the vendor said they could do. So it's a 2-year implementation project when it starts, whenever it
Based
starts.
on where they plan to be and where they are now, how does that?
I think really it's just getting background information and identifying the staff and putting names down. I also know they've had a workforce development project that experienced some sort of slowdown, and I think it was related to a tool, and that's all I know because I'm not monitoring that particular project. So that could be impacting it.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Were you done? So I also have a sense of fair amount of turnover generally at the department. Is that something that you would have awareness of or
I
that would
know.
factor into
I-
reporting?
I met with Commissioner Harrington back in June on this project because I wanted to have a conversation on how we felt. And we exchanged emails when I told him I was going to be reporting on this and what essentially I sent him what I would show this committee. And he mentioned, that they're struggling with staffing. They really are. But it's something that, there needs to be a solution to move forward. So we'll have to figure it out.
So, and I wonder, I wonder, this was a conversation actually I was having on a different subject this morning, but around statewide staffing. This is a problem that, we see across the state for private industry, never mind public industry. And so I wonder if there are agencies or departments that are finding novel ways to get the job done despite workforce challenges. Are they, contracting out for project management? Is that possible?
They are doing, I know the ADS does that. I'm sure they'll speak to that. But that's a really good question. I mean, I think we all probably know stories of people who were hired and can't come here because they can't find a place to live. There's all sorts of reasons, there's a really low unemployment rate, especially in technology. So it's trying.
Good.
Mhm.
Could you elaborate on your technical approach concerns with the phased approach? The DMV seems like they're doing a plunge, they're shut down for 2 weeks to just switch over both, but can you elaborate on why the 1 year delay between the go live and the tax and the other one is a concern for you?
Because the mainframe system is poorly documented based on, this is the research I did and talking to Sean Naylor. And I have concerns because it's one piece could be feeding the other piece and you wouldn't know it. So I have concerns on whether, given the state of the system, it's a good idea. One, do we even know for sure that by turning off the tax portion piece wouldn't break the benefits portion piece? Are we going to, and the other concerns related to that, we would have to do in an executive session, just because I wouldn't want to discuss things that too much about the system, but I do have concerns on it, but this isn't a bad problem. It's a solvable problem because it would mean that we just can't go live. The state can't go live with just phase one and wait for phase two, that they do it all at the same time. They could still develop it, test it, complete it, pay the vendor for it, and work on phase two and go live with both of them at the same time. That's not a bad scenario. I'm not talking about them losing money, but I'm just concerned about that. Now, the state might say, no, we have a solution for this, or, hey, it's not built like that, or they might, and this is part of, the consequences for discussing it in an interim way. I'm being honest with you about the questions that I have and why I have them. But it might not be an issue in the end. And I will let you know.
And the last project we asked about was ERP one. I know there's, it's not ready for a full report or anything like that.
Yeah.
Summary or rundown on that.
Yeah. So ERP, they haven't contracted for the independent review at this point. And we have a lot of questions. So I'm sort of done with the presentation at this point because I did not write that section up. We're still gathering facts. Now, okay. So I think that a good way to discuss this is to really talk about, it's almost like a little TikTok, kind of been gathering facts. So we have, the big bill in 2022 funded 11.8 million for the ERP state financial system, and that's what JITOC is going to review and release the funds after we have the independent review and I do the review process. In addition to that, it's difficult to look at just the financial management piece without looking at the whole project, which includes the HR and capital management, which were funded, I think, in the big bill in 2021. And the actual funding, seems like the funding for it. We also found some historical funding for the project. In the capital bill in 2016, there was an ERP phase one listed for 5 million. In FY18, there was a capital bill with phase two with $5.8 million in it. It's our understanding based on the research that JFO has done is that that money has been spent, and it was spent on vision upgrades and also a procurement tool called VT buys. Now, we don't know, I still have to go back. And again, this is all in process, so it's not going to be complete. But the next phase is go back and see what the language related to that funding was, and did it change over time? Did they say, okay, I mean, I know there was an RFP that was produced in 2018 and for the ERP system, and it didn't result in a contract. So for some reason, the bid wasn't awarded. I don't know the reason why, but it fits within the time frame. And it's also important to notice that that's also around the time frame where DII was dissolved and ADS was formed. So there was sort of some disconnect. It seems like there was some disconnect too that could be, a good reason for. But we still need to research that. And so that with the HR budget and the budget replacement were funded in FY22 big bill for $12.7 million. So that brings up the total for everything that said that was funded with ERP around 35 million, above 35 million. So we're looking at that. The other issues around the budget, I mean, the ERP is, given how things are with this project and it's all intertwined, ADS will be doing an independent review on the project, and it'll be the entire project. It will be the finance budget and the HR piece for the ERP. Let's see. So the competitive bid that was done for this project was done, my understanding, through a state cooperative, through the National Association of State Procurement Officials. And what they do is they create a bid with input from multiple states, and they post it, they get responses, and then they create a contract that states or other entities can buy off a contract. And there are provisions within state government, I have to get into the details of it, about what that means and what the requirements are to do so. Now, I did get information from Secretary Riley Hughes about this, pointing to the fact when that particular RFP was posted by that organization, Vermont had a kind of a pointer from their bid website pointing to that, and it was a cloud solutions RFP. When I looked at the RFP, it essentially said it has to be a cloud solution. It has to be defined as a cloud solution based on NIST, that National Institute of Standards and Technology framework. And it had to be available for states and municipalities and others. So really that was the bid. So really, if you provided cloud services, you could bid on that. And the assessment seems to be what I've seen, unless I can find something else, that it was assessed based on its adherence to whether or not it was a cloud solution on NIST. So when I spoke earlier, when I talked about controls, and what the real purpose of like bulletin 3.5 and what it gives you projects that are defined based on a standard. And so you could say that for cloud services, they assessed whether or not it was a cloud services done by NIST standards. But what really is important for us when we're implementing a project or finding a solution is, does the project align with the state's business requirements? So does the solution align? So the Workday vendor was selected via the NIST process as a cloud services vendor with their entire suite of modules. But in order to be successful, we need to know, does Vermont align with that solution? And what do we have to show that it does align with the solution? Because if we don't know where the alignment is and where it isn't, and I always refer to this as the edges of a solution. So especially since, we're on PeopleSoft for vision, and you could have had customizations that were done in PeopleSoft. Or you could have had parts of PeopleSoft and Vision that weren't considered a customization, but they're not really built into the Workday solution. And you need to know where those edges are, because if you don't, if you start implementing the solution, then you could be subject to some runaway costs because you discover parts that aren't in alignment with the functionality of the system.
So I just want to, I've learned some new things today. So, but maybe there are things that happen pretty regularly. So I think what you said was that the procurement process was done outside of the state's direction.
I wouldn't say that. I think the state signed off on it.
So
But-
it was a conglomerate. It wasn't driven by Vermont. It was agreed to by Vermont. As part of a collaborative.
When I, regarding the state, when Denise did testify, Secretary Riley Hughes testified, she mentioned the state did contribute to it. And I did see that the state had their contract provisions, their standing contract provisions as part of this particular contract. What I have to see is there something, I'm following the trail that they gave me, the contract that was through ADS.
Yeah.
On what contract they originally, bought off, and they have like the people saying, yes, we authorize, the state has authorized working through it. But the pieces that I'm missing are the where and when and if, where was the alignment done to what the state's requirements are to what the solution can provide? Because that when it comes right down to it, that's what we need to know. Are we in alignment or not? Do we understand how?
So I understand that piece being missing. I want to make sure though that I understand the first part. So, which was a bunch of entities coming together, states, to say, we're all interested in finding this type of vendor that is NIST, that follows the NIST certifications and is cloud-based.
But it was very vague. A cloud services vendor could anything be from,
It's more of a process question from
Okay.
right now, Lisa, first.
okay.
Because I'm trying to understand how frequently that happens in other projects in Vermont where we are part of an RFP from multi-states or multi-entities.
I have seen, like in my time over education, that education do that for like the English language learners program, where they were part of a consortium of multiple states. And if you recall, labor tried to be part of a consortium for unemployment with multiple states and kind of get some buying power. Now, there's a lot of contracts on this particular organization site that are real commodities based. And maybe it makes sense to kind of go there to buy your traffic cones because you're with maybe, 10 other states that are also buying traffic cones, and you can get them cheaper through a contract that's available to all these other states. Where I have concerns is, well, I have questions. I don't think I'm not done with looking into this and trying to understand it. I'm just reporting where I am based on following, the cookie trail that they've provided. That's all.
So if I might just restate again, what I think I'm hearing, so is we bid as part of a consortium. You told us the two requirements were basic requirements were cloud-based and NIST standards. Vermont added in our contract terms as part of what would have to be agreed to.
As did the other states too.
And then, then we contracted with the respondent.
Well, this is where there's another gap, because the other competitive bid,
Would you mind
Oh.
turning off screen share? So
Oh.
I'll go back to the camera.
sorry,
And then after this train of thought, I'll go to Rep. Priestley.
thank you. So the other RFP that was issued was for workday funding, pricing. And it's my understanding they received one bid from Workday. I don't understand because the pricing is different that the state signed a contract in May of 2022 for Workday. And they received one bid on the Workday pricing. I haven't followed up on it yet. I don't know. I have a lot of questions about that. I don't know how that came to be and why if we had, so this is a gap. This is interim. I'm just starting, but there is a gap in my understanding. So that was the other competitive bid that was done was for the pricing.
So the solution and the pricing were bid separately?
Well, the solution was really, in my mind, and what was done through NASIO was, is this a true cloud-based solution? And honestly, this could be really helpful if you've done your needs assessment, you've done your alignment, you know you aligned with Workday, and if the national organization has better pricing, you could buy off that contract, but you'd know you've done your due diligence on that piece. But I don't know, I'm tracking the way back to what was done, what do we have for requirements, and how does it relate to that contract? And if we did do a competitive bid just for the pricing, are we considered still working off that contract? I don't know the answer to that. The other pieces that are in process for this project include, there was an RFP issued by ADS for implementation services for everything. So that would be implementation services for the Workday solution. That hasn't been awarded, and it won't. It's subject to the independent review, because when they do the independent review, they'll do the implementation services and the process for selecting the ERP vendor. So they did an RFP for the implementation service too. And there was an RFP by the Agency of Administration for, it looked like business process reengineering, but I don't think that was awarded, but I don't know. But if you're going to reengineer your agency, I would to support this, and so you can, reap the benefits of a different solution. I think that's great, but it should be considered as part of the cost of this project. And I don't know where that is. So we're still remember, the independent review hasn't been done, still gathering the facts, and I'm just trying to follow through. And there could be some pieces that I am making the incorrect assumption on. When I first heard there was a RFP developed through NASIO, I just assumed because Utah was the lead agency on that, and then other states jump on board. I assumed that it would be an RFP related to the HR ERP, because that's what Utah has implemented. And I thought, oh, well, they did the HR ERP, but it wasn't even a RFP specifically for an ERP solution or a part of an ERP solution. It was generally for cloud services.
Yeah.
And again, that could be great solution we just have to track back and see what the state has done to ensure they're actually aligned with a solution. That's all. And we just still need to go through that. I'm trying to think if there was another major piece.
Recently, did you have a question related to that specifically, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have the kind of three pieces, but they're all related. I'm pretty sure. Well, one, Lisa's like, yeah, I guess one piece for me was we'd been talking about one, but I thought that there were like 3 RFPs related to this, which you kind of confirmed in the last piece, so that's great. I guess, Lisa, I'm wondering, and this again is early in the process, so it may not be something that and just I guess I would just flag it. That would be great to know in the future. If not, are you getting a sense from reviewing these RFPs that the price, I guess that the price of the projects involves more than just like the implementation or the like cloud services, like entity, like vendors, hours, and also takes into account like the volume of work from the business office of ADS and or any kind of like implementing agencies? Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if there's a sense there, especially since ADS like basically charges agencies when they're doing work so that so I guess that's a piece. And then also I've been talking to other states that have been implementing Workday with varying degrees of success, and in each case the green status as they report as they go is an area that has come up over and over as an area that states wish they had paid better attention to. And so I just wanted to like flag that as an area if you're reviewing like what criteria actually goes into things like status from the vendors as they go. So those are partial questions, partial just raising.
No, I appreciate that. And I also want to stress that we're at a stage of the project where some of this information is not compiled yet. It must be compiled to inform the independent review, and that hasn't been scheduled yet. So I'm sure the information exists, but it hasn't been compiled yet. And so I'm mindful about what I'm asking for. And I'm also I am giving, Denise a heads up. She's seen the facts I've gathered so far, and we've been discussing them because I don't want her to be surprised when the independent review is done, when I ask for, show me the alignment between Workday and the business requirements. I don't want her to be surprised that I'm asking for that. So I'm trying to use this time. And this was really, this was bumped to the forefront, and really, normally I wouldn't get involved in this until the independent review was done. But it was, if in my memo, when I recommended the funding be, secured while the state had the funding for the ERP, because we know we needed to do it. I recommended that it go through JITOC when they were at the stage when they had all the information, the independent review was done. But I also noted a concern that I didn't think there was enough money allocated for the project, that there's no way I thought the money that they had already allocated would be enough. I had logged that particular concern, and I feel more strongly about that. But we also noted in the project that when this project was discussed, we were talking a lot about the HR piece, and the HR piece for Workday is up and running in many states. But the finance management module isn't. And I noted that in the review too, but noted that Iowa was currently implementing Workday at the state government level. It had successfully been implemented at the Iowa Department of Transportation. Washington State is I think, a pretty sophisticated state for technology. They were also in the middle of an implementation really far down the road with Workday. But the issue with Washington State is they have legacy systems in almost all of their departments still. So whereas Vermont went through this in the 90s to have a single finance system, that's what they're going through now while implementing a Workday solution. So they're really in the weeds in terms of trying to figure out how to model and convert the legacy information. So, but this spring, and I mentioned this to chairs and at the time, but Iowa announced that they would no longer be implementing Workday because it didn't meet their business needs. And their path, they had a similar path as Vermont. They hadn't undergo an IRP process. I think they bought off a competitive bid too, but they backed out. Now, nobody really knows for sure on what happened there. It could be they decided to stick with their original solution. Maybe there were customizations that were more, maybe something happened. Maybe it was the state's fault. I mean, in these projects, it's not always the vendor that is at fault. Sometimes the state isn't prepared. They haven't fully identified their solution upfront in the RFP or in the contracting process. And then they identify new requirements, and then they find that it's going to cost too much, more than they thought. Which is the danger of not doing kind of rigorous requirements at the start. So we don't know why. I'd also been monitoring like the project in Oregon, which was last spring. I was watching testimony in front of their legislative committees. And what happened with the HR implementation was a problem with payroll. And to me, it read just that it was the fault of the state government. They didn't do adequate testing. And so you had employees getting improper pay. Sometimes a lot more, sometimes a lot less. They were having problems meeting the bills. They couldn't process overtime. But every time that happened, it screwed up the tax withholding. And then some employees said, be careful, because next year you're going to owe a big tax bill because we didn't withhold enough taxes. And so, but that was a case where just looking at it and the description, it just seemed like the state didn't do proper requirements and they were paying the price at that point. So it's not always a vendor solution. Sometimes it's the state. But it was the Iowa situation that really kind of brought this to light. And then there are definitely some concerns on how much of the state was included on the business side, included in the requirements gathering too. So we're going to look at that as well. So I know when Denise started, Denise Riley Hughes, our Secretary of ADS, is committed to looking to understanding the alignment between Workday and confirming that. The state of Rhode Island is also implementing the financial management, and they're about, according to her, 6 months ahead of us. And they're finding ways, and their Workday is altering their system. So I'm not saying that that Workday isn't the solution that's going to work for Vermont, not at all. I'm just saying we have a lot of work to do. So we need to make sure we understand what the alignment was done and what the results of that alignment are, and make sure that we're not in a situation where there could be runaway cost around areas where Workday doesn't meet some of Vermont's needs, specific needs. So I know I'm out of time.
Rep. Priestley, did you have another quick question?
No, thank you. I was answered.
Okay, cool. Then thank you very much, Lisa. I believe you'll stick around with us for the remainder of the day, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Secretary, I saw you come in. As I understand it, you'd like to talk about IE here first, and then after lunch we begin UI. Is that still the plan? Perfect. Then we'll play musical chairs, and if you're ready, we'll be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See? You're gonna walk through the presentation, so. Yeah, we can. Morning.
Secretary, are you coming up also, or would you like to stay in the gallery?
Stay in the gallery for this one.
Okay.
For the record, I'm Mike Nagel from Agency of Digital Services. I am the IT lead for Human Services.
Good morning. My name is Garth Walker. I am the IE&E Program Director. I work for the Department of Vermont Health Access. I've been in my position for the last 12 months. I've been working with the state of Vermont for the past 4 years, but I'm actually also, I've been a proud citizen of Vermont for the last 23 and a US citizen for the last 2. So I've been here for quite some time. I've had somewhat of an interesting journey, which I can certainly speak to, of course, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you today. I'm from the South, so a little bit further south than Vermont, originally from Australia. But been here for quite some time, but I think I still sound a little bit different. So hopefully you can understand what I'm getting at. So I'm just, bear with me. I've been provided the link to share, I believe. So I believe I need to join the meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And this is the document Vermont IE modernization over. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, yeah, I do want to sort of provide a caveat that, Mike and I have been, we're glad that we're able to come today. And this is a presentation that I've previously provided to a vendor community, actually, in the state of Florida when Vermont attended a conference a couple of months back. We're still developing a very broad, holistic presentation on IE&E as a program. And what I really want to do today was just give you a bit of an overview as to the procurement that we're working on right now that Lisa spoke to, which is the VTICE procurement. So that is what I was hoping to get to today. And I am just trying to find the link.
And if you're not able to share, that's totally okay. We all have our devices. So if we want to pull it up and you just tell us what page you're on as we go through, that also works.
Okay. Let's try this one. Oh, here we go. I was looking at the wrong email thread.
exchange student touring the building right now. I'm just gonna go say hello.
Cool. Okay, well, it's looks like Zoom is installing an update, but let me get started nonetheless. So I'll do this somewhat from memory, I guess, as this is working. It looks like it's coming online. So as I mentioned, my background, and I'm mindful of time, so please, otherwise I'll typically keep talking, so keep me honest on the time allocation. As I mentioned, my background, I've been in this role for the last 12 months. Prior to my role in IE&E, my position was one of OCM, Organizational Change Management. And my role was really focused on ensuring that projects were actually going to deliver the value that they had intended to deliver, that the training, that it was, oh, here we go. Turn off. Don't know where to do I.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Give me. Yep, sorry.
So previously when we've,
Let's try that. All right, there we go.
this committee has previously received many updates about IE, probably 2 or 3 years ago. And I recall we were introduced to multiple different project sponsors over that time. So are you the current project sponsor?
Yes.
Great. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm trying to think, how do I share?
Press share screen.
Oh, share screen. Oh, there we go. That's right.
Pull it up. Is that the one?
That is the one.
You go. Is that it?
I think that's it. Let's just do the. I think we'll just,
Is that it?
oh, that's presentation. Let's try that. Okay, I think. Okay, so thank you very much. My apologies for the technical issue there. So what I wanted to provide you an update was really as you mentioned, there's been quite a few updates over the last period of time, and I think Lisa spoke to that as well, most recently in terms of the history of IE&E. My role, as I mentioned, from the point of view of organizational change management, I call that out because I think that's when you think about what's different today to what we have done previously is, Mike and I are still relatively sort of new to particularly the IE&E framework, but my approach has been one where I've really been focused on ensuring that there is really solid awareness in terms of what the project is trying to achieve, who are the impacted stakeholders, also more importantly, what's different today than what it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even 5. So I was brought into this position because I guess some people identified that I had a talent that could potentially benefit integrated eligibility and enrollment program. And I think the progress we made over the last 12 months is certainly not just because of me, it's because of the commitment from a lot of people on the team. But we do have, I believe, over the last 12 months, demonstrated a significant step forward in the work that we're doing. But really, my approach from an organizational change management point of view is really recognizing that there's a need for solid awareness within the stakeholder community, whether it's within the state government, within the project team, but also our external stakeholders, Vermont citizens, as well as our vendor community, are all impacted based on this project. So what I was hoping to do today is just give you a very quick overview. Again, this is a presentation that I created that I was invited to present to a vendor committee or a vendor organization at a conference in Florida. And this QR code, if you were to use your phone, actually is something which the vendor community represents communications that we have sent to our vendor community, illustrating and informing them of the progress that we've made in the Vermont IES landscape. So I think that's really what we're trying to do today. So as I mentioned, we are certainly welcome to come back. We're happy to come back and give you more detailed overview. So I just want to maybe touch on some of the key elements of the work that we're doing today. So when I sort of think back, when I came on board and I thought about, the history of Vermont's procurement history when it came to integrated eligibility and enrollment, we have had quite a few various procurement elements or type of activities. And Lisa sort of spoke to this a little bit in terms of some work that we did during COVID. But really the work that integrated eligibility and enrollment has been doing has really been focused on the way I would sort of put this is like system security and risk reduction, keeping the lights on in our current system, trying to making improvements where needed, whether it's mandated based on legislative, whether it's mandated because of our federal partners, but sort of making sure that we can continue to serve Vermonters, which is ultimately the charge of the IE program. But some of these activities have absolutely been impacted by various factors outside of our control, natural disasters, in terms of some change in technology needs, legislative updates or changes or priorities, even changes or priorities within state government, within the Agency of Human Services or ADS. There's also been, we responded as to some federal mandates when it related to the ACA in terms of providing that services and trying to extend coverage to all Vermonters. I say this because when I look back and when people say, where are we at with this modernization thing? A lot of people sort of think it's this one thing that we haven't quite started. But I would actually argue that, we've been incrementally modernizing our infrastructure, but it's been general and it has been relatively planned, but it really has been focused over the last 10 years of making sure that the existing legacy infrastructure is still working, that it still provides services to Vermonters. And again, I sort of look at this to sort of its system security and risk reduction. So where are we today in terms of what's different? Well, I think as Lisa mentioned, the risks associated with our legacy IES systems remain, hasn't changed. And when we say this, we still recognize that, it's the access mainframe, but also compared to 2012, the difference is we also now have Vermont Health Connect, which is on a different system. But the way that I approached the procurement timeline or the procurement journey for IE when I came on board is because I'm not a technical person. Let me be very frank about that. I'm a people person. That's been my background. My background is in human resources. It's in change management. I spent 13 years working for Stone Mountain Resort. In fact, that's what brought me originally to the States. Was I was a J1 employee traveling the world, living out of a backpack, and I just kind of fell in love and got married and never quite left. And here I am, 23 years on. But really, I looked at this from an outcomes point of view. Like, what are we trying to achieve? What's the outcome of the work that we're trying to deliver? And what we really recognize, I think, is that the risks with the legacy system, if we think about the outcomes, that enrollment experience is still incredibly challenging for Vermonters. System aside, it's a challenging experience for Vermonters. The process is incredibly manual, labor intensive. And I think, so that's from a Vermonter's point of view, but also recognizing that another critical stakeholder that I think we really need to focus on is our internal employee, the state of Vermont employee workforce. We have limited resources to manage and maintain our existing systems, particularly the access mainframe. But also the people that are working on the front lines, providing the enrollment support services for Vermonters. They are working with a system that is inefficient. It lacks relatively modern automation. They have to have very complex rules to keep the work moving forward. So we're asking our workforce who are already sort of trying to do a lot with a lot less to try to use tools that are not really effective for what they need to use. So I think when we think about these risks, those are the things that have not changed. They were there back in 2012. And those risks are still the same. The difference is we are a little bit further ahead, of course, in terms of that timeline. But I also think today there's a significant difference in terms of the relationship between AHS and ADS. I think there has been some evolution of that relationship and that dynamic. We've been very successful in that we've engaged the support of procurement assistance vendor to actually provide us some guidance and support in areas that we had limited knowledge. And that certainly has helped us out in the last 2 years as well. And I think the other thing I just want to call out is this customer expectations. I think when we think about the last 3 years of the COVID pandemic experience and what people are now experiencing or expecting from an online experience, I think it's very different. I think people are more used to now being able to get things online, to have information pre-filled out in an application, to be able to get updates as to where their application is in the process. So even though Vermonters, if we were to ask someone on the street today, what do they expect from their enrollment experience? They wouldn't know what we're talking about, but I think when they actually do think about what they expect in terms of having information available on their mobile device, getting real-time updates, I think the customer's experience for what they are expecting for service, for an online service experience, has certainly evolved. And I say this in the sense that we're still focused on system security and risk reduction, but really we recognize that while we still have to do that to keep the lights on, we need to make sure that we can actually deliver functional improvement. And I think that's a significant change to where we are today. So what are we trying to achieve? And I think really when we look at this, this kind of gives you an idea of the problem that we're trying to solve. And this is really the key part about it is, and this is, I think, at its core, what IE&E is all about in terms of the programs, in terms of what we're trying to do. We want to make sure that we absolutely, without a doubt, have a user-friendly application experience and a process for Vermonters so that they can actually submit information once and making sure that that information can actually feed through the subsequent forms and the subsequent applications as well. We want to make sure that Vermonters have seamless access to benefits, recognizing that we're providing the gateway for some, almost two-thirds of the population of Vermont to get economic and also healthcare services in terms of the programs that we oversee. And we don't want to put unnecessary hurdles in front of them to actually to get those benefits as well. And I think, as I mentioned again, is the efficiency and effectiveness for our state workers. I think I've heard that in multiple sessions that I've watched over the last year as well, is recognizing we need to improve the process for our state workers because they are very committed to the work that they do. We need to give them tools so that they can do the work well. And another critical part, I think, as well, is to ensure that they're able to do the work as efficiently and effectively as they possibly can so they can support Vermonters who can't use the new systems that we develop and implement. And I think that's a really critical thing. We talk about access to technology and cell service and access to those kind of things is how do we support Vermonters that need the extra help to get the access to those benefits? They will still need to talk to someone. So we want to make sure that we can actually reduce the labor intensive tasks, enable better coordination across programs, and making sure that our staff can really support the Vermont citizens that truly need that extra bit of help to get access to their benefits. So these objectives, right? What does this mean? The objectives of the VTIES project, the integrated eligibility system, is we really group this out into sort of three main areas in terms of critical stakeholders like Vermonters, state staff, and then I look at it from an IES, from a technology point of view. We want to make sure that Vermonters can actually get an idea of what they could be available or what could be available to them for benefits through a web-based source. We want to simplify the benefit application process, and we want to make sure that they, it's of course a secure and an accessible enrollment experience for them as well. For state staff, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that they can really, they through sort of a approved system, that they're able to focus on complex cases, that they can use automation to take away the tasks that currently take 50, 60, 70% of their work right now. We want to make sure that staff also have an online learning platform that allows them to be effective in the work that they're doing as well. Lisa mentioned lack of documentation in our legacy systems. We need to make sure that what we implement can actually be used effectively. And as updates and modernization continues to evolve in the system moving forward, that our staff have the resources and the ability to learn through an online platform, because that's really where we recognize over the last 3.5, 4 years, the importance of that virtual learning environment and also available 24/7 when staff are available to do the training. When it comes to the IES, the integrated eligibility system, sort of the technology of it, we want to make sure we take information that's currently over two separate systems, over Access and Vermont Health Connect, that we bring them together and merge that information. Because right now the information is over two separate systems. They don't communicate very well. And it's very difficult for staff to be able to jump from one to the other to get a holistic view of a Vermonter of what it is that they need to be successful in the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So we want to make sure that we can also ensure by bringing the data into one source, it also allows us to make sure that we can ensure that the right people are in the right programs and we can manage that as well. So when we think about, what we're trying to do with this VTI's procurement, is really we have identified that we're really trying to enhance that customer experience, customer being Vermonter and also state staff. As Lisa mentioned, the VTI's procurement is really focused on delivering maximum value for Vermonters and state staff through a customer portal, which is the front door for a Vermonter, the case management, which is really like the worker portal, where our state staff will be managing all the data, and a business rules engine, which is what's going to be used to actually make the determination based on the data, based on the input, what can a Vermonter be eligible for. Now, as we went through the visioning of what this looked like and where to start and how to deliver this, we recognize that for those three primary factors or primary functions to work, that there's a lot of other behind the scenes work that has to happen, such as interfaces, financial management, issuing of the benefit, of course, correspondence, communication to our citizens as well. And that we recognize that some additional supporting infrastructure will need to be implemented for those three primary modules to be successful and actually deliver value. But we also recognize that in terms of this procurement, what we're looking for, recognizing the importance of what it is that we're trying to achieve with these outcomes, is that, and we've waited, that there's been quite some time in this journey to get to where we are, is that we need to recognize that what we're looking for from an outcomes point of view does exist. It does exist in the vendor community. We've engaged, we've conducted outreach with our vendor community, but also other states. And we know that this product does exist. And a prime vendor is one of those vendors that have done this before. That is something that we're looking for. I say that in the sense that we understand that there's an opportunity to go the route of a boutique installation or a boutique procurement, and that could take a very long time. And we simply don't have the resources to really ensure that that could be a successful integration by sort of finding multiple vendors to do that work. It's also very challenging to manage the contracting area. Is there a question?
You don't have the resources to manage that. What resources would be necessary to manage that?
Sure. So if I clarify the resources, it's the multiple procurements, multiple contracts, making sure that if we had 6 different vendors, and I say this in the sense, the point I'm trying to make is the prime vendor to deliver the IES solution, when I called out portal, case management and rules engine, we're looking for one vendor to deliver that functionality, as opposed to doing one procurement just for a rules engine, one procurement just for case management, and the potential or the required resources to make sure that all of the vendor management, I guess, is the point I was trying to make. So your question was relating to what would we need to cover that?
What do you mean by, I have general questions around resources.
Sure.
But specifically, you just talked about not having the resources. And so you meant doing more of a boutique process would require more people.
Correct. More vendors, more management process of oversight of how the vendors implementing. Contracting process in the state is difficult as it is. So the second you go from one prime vendor to contract with to 6, obviously is going to add resources to our staff to have to manage those relationships.
So what I believe what you said was that you don't have access to the resources, which sounds like you couldn't make that choice, as opposed to it's not a good choice there for me. So
sure. Yeah, I think maybe if I sort of potentially use the incorrect words, I think it's as we looked at this in terms of our focus on delivering outcomes, recognizing the time of our legacy system and the challenges that we've had, as you've already mentioned, you've had many updates into where we are with IE&E is what can we do differently moving forward to actually deliver an outcome that actually is a tangible benefit for Vermonters, is recognizing, if we're going to go shopping, we could go to Home Depot and get almost everything that we need, or we could spend time driving all around the country to get the individual tiles and the things that we need to build our house. We understand that prime vendors through our outreach and engagement have what it is that we're looking for that will certainly deliver those outcomes. And in terms of, and whether it's not so much having the access to resources, it's an approach that we recognize delivers first and foremost the outcomes that we're looking for.
That's an important distinction.
Absolutely.
And so, if there's a problem with resources related to moving these projects along and making sure that they're well implemented, that's a distinct problem that, we would want to understand.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not what you're saying. It's not an access to resources.
Well, I don't think we have the details yet since
Okay.
we're only in a, we drafted an RFP, we've gone through the requirements gathering and building. Until we hear some of the bids and the solutions that come back, we don't know the full breadth of what our resource needs are going to be for implementation at this point. But I think we're jumping to the idea that if we've got a multi-vendor environment, we know there's going to be added resources. There's going to be constraints on state staff that have to be involved, right? To manage each vendor individually. So we've gotten ourselves to a point where we've gotten an RFP that we're ready to start socializing with the public. That's taken a long time for us to get there over the past year. And our resources, even over this past year, have been constrained, which is, it's definitely going to take a large team and effort to be able to pull off an implementation this big. But until we get bid responses back, vendors might be offering to bring certain resources to the table as well, but we're not going to do that until we see submissions.
So to be clear, access to resources is or is not kind of driving your approach to procurement? Is that what, so I want to make sure that I understand what are you taking options off the table in terms of solutions you're looking for because of access to resources at the state level?
I don't think so. I think our RFP, when it goes out the door, is open enough to allow our vendors to submit what they feel is the best offering out there versus going out on individualized procurements, which was a lot of the past history of, I don't understand it by E&E, of trying to figure out how do I procure modular implementations of these products over and over again, which I think is something I want to outline. The presentation that Garth has here is really to outline a key component of, Garth and I met, I guess, about a year ago, which is when I first stepped into this role at our ISM conference, which we were meeting with vendors to start understanding what products were out there that can meet our needs. Most of the vendors at that conference did not even want to meet with us. They were tired of listening to Vermont start with a procurement and pull it off the table, start with another procurement, pull it off the table, to change management, right? And Garth's ability to pull our vendor community in over the last year, and to the point where he's presented this presentation at that same conference this year in front of an audience of about 150 vendors whose eyes and ears were on Garth and looking at Vermont to say they know what they're doing now. They're ready to go. So now we're opening this procurement up to these vendors to say, you see what we want, you see what we want in a solution. What are your ideas? Bring us a prime vendor that knows how to do this, have been doing this in states, have been implementing multiple solutions, because it's not one. There is no one silver bullet solution for this. This is going to be a few different technologies that have to be pieced together. And you want a prime vendor that has the experience that knows how to piece those together. And that's why our procurement strategy is going. We may end up with hey, one vendor can come in and say, there is one product that can do it all for you. And here it is, but until we see those responses.
That was really helpful, Mark. And, Mike, sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I apologize, Mike. That was helpful framing. And I have workforce on the brain. And so I just heard language that made me want to drive in. So I'm done now, but I do want to come back on kind of workforce holistically at some point. Yeah, sure.
So, so thank you. Great questions, and I appreciate you jumping. If I use some language that causes concern, please definitely speak up and, yeah.
If I may, you use the word boutique and you said that is not what you're looking for?
Correct. And correct, yes. As Mike said, in terms of our outreach, and as Mike said, we went to this conference last year. I'd been in the job for 2 months, and we had identified an approach, and we had engaged leveraging our procurement assistance vendor to sort of vision in terms of what's the outcomes. And that's really where I started the journey in my role was, well, what's the problem? What are we trying to solve for? Who are we trying to benefit? What are the outcomes? Okay, fine. And we really went through this process of engaging with the vendor community to sort of say, these are the outcomes that we're looking for. What information do you need to know to help understand the problem that we're trying to solve? And that's really been the outreach journey that we've engaged with over the last 12 months. And I'll share with a little bit more information in terms of that outreach that I've been doing, which I think is a thing to call out, like what's different today than what it was a year ago or even 12 months ago. I think a critical thing when we think about the implementation approach that we're doing with VTIs is that we absolutely recognize that if we dictate an implementation process to a vendor, we are essentially saying we want a customized solution and it's going to cost a lot of money. And instead, our approach is really to be focused on these are the outcomes that we need to improve or the outcomes that we're trying to deliver for our citizens and also for the system. How would your solution best deliver those improvements? And explain it to us how you would like to maybe present that timeline based on a set of criteria that we just, some considerations. Those considerations absolutely recognize in terms of, any constraints that we have with our legacy systems. We do have some mandated technologies that we've invested in that we want to leverage. And of course, there's, relative to pain points that we have in various programs within the IE program, within healthcare and also economic services. So we want to make sure that we go into this with the eyes wide open, but also leverage the expertise of the implementation vendor with the solution that they have. But we also understand that one of the things that we really want to make sure is this incremental release of improvements. We don't want to just spend the next 4 years in the back room designing a solution and then implementing it in 2028 and say, look at this, isn't it great? We understand that we need to make improvements as soon as possible, but also show incremental improvements as well. From an adoption point of view, from a change management point of view, that is also great for adoption and allows state staff to increasingly gain expertise and experience in the new system. We can actually start to deliver functional improvements to Vermonters as well. And I think while we think about the benefits of a portal, for instance, in terms of Vermonters being able to provide information to us, we sort of change that dynamic in terms of where we're trying to go with this with an online system, that Vermonters are actually part of the engagement of providing information and having access to their benefits. So we really want to make sure that we do have phased release of improvement that allows us to test, adjust, amend, and move forward as we go through this. And we also want to make sure that we can, as needed, as Lisa also touched on, VTIs will still need to send information back to Access because of other services that will rely on that information. So we need to make sure that we make those strategic connections when needed to ensure that those services can continue. So that's certainly integration with legacy systems will be required until we fully deliver and stand up the VTI solution. But when in terms of what that looks like is understanding that that's a collaborative discussion with the selected vendor. In their RFP bid response, they will propose that, but also once we make our selection, will be that really detailed analysis of what are those pain points. So this is when I sort of get out of my wheelhouse a little bit, but in terms of, and Mike, I don't know if you want to sort of speak to this a little bit more than I do. Do you want to sort of touch on this information?
Sure. On the bottom four, or I can start at the top. So obviously we're working on a modular replacement of some of our technology. We've been working closely with ADS and the CTO's office on some of our enterprise platform things. I'm sure you guys are hearing them left and right, Salesforce, MuleSoft. identity access management systems, all different components of our technology stack that a lot of the projects that are probably coming across your plate, you're hearing the same components. So we're trying to lay that framework for our vendors when they come in to jump in and provide solutions that fit into our ecosystem the best. And we've guided them with a few couple components. The first one being our enterprise content management platform of Highland for base for document storage and retrieval. We've got MuleSoft, which I spoke about, which will be the primary integration engine. So we start thinking about module implementation. We're looking at potential vendor that might be implementing a certain customer portal that needs to integrate with the future case management system. The expectations of ADS as well as CMS and FNS in general, which is important to note. IE program is oversight by both CMS and FNS for food and nutrition services, both oversight committees from the feds on this project, that they're looking at modular implementation that have integration through web services so that you can easily plug and play components in for your solution and not get vendor lock across this big monolithic solution for IE. You have a question?
Clarification.
Sure.
So previously, I think I heard you say Vermont used to, or in the past, we've had this kind of modular approach and nobody wanted to bid.
Yeah.
And so now, that sounded like something I remembered.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so can you
Just difference?
Yes, thank you.
So prior was going out and buying a component and not recognizing that we don't even know what our other components are going to be. So we're going to the table with, we know what our solution is. So we talked about those three core modules as part of our initial procurement being customer portal, rules engine, and case management, right? Basically the meat and potatoes of what you need to deliver IE programs across our environment.
Mhm.
We know that there's certain elements that those things are going to need to connect to. One, they need to connect to each other, and they're going to need to connect to a noticing platform, right? Those types of elements. Where we've proposed out to this vendor that in our RFP, when it goes out the door, is asking for a full solution that brings together modularity of these components. So we know that these solutions fit, piece together. I feel like in the past, and I wasn't directly involved, I was indirectly involved as the IT lead for DCF 4 or 5 years ago. The push was always keep procurement small. There was a recommendation, get small procurements out the door, buy one specific module without stepping back and recognizing that you have a massive solution that you're trying to put forward. And that's why those starts and stops kept failing when individual procurement of going by an MPI. Right? Just an MPI, which is kind of just one component of this full solution that's like an integral part, but it's very small. So this big procurement is giving guidance to our vendors to say, here's our ecosystem. These are the things that we think work best in our environment. What solutions do you have that bring to the table, leverage our current investments, right? We're not closing the door to say, if you bring something better to us, we're going to listen to it and we're going to take the advice of the guidance of those procurements. But we are trying to fit to these 4 components, right? MuleSoft, Salesforce is a preferred but not required. We're looking at an IAM solution. Okta is what we went through as we were building this presentation. And we've got a lock-in on Verado, which is an MDM platform that we currently purchased through Vital, and they manage the HIE Master Person Index for us. So the plans are that we need to integrate with these current environments. We shouldn't be creating some other Master Person Index for the Agency of Human Services.
Mhm. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
So as sort of, I know this is really small and I apologize. Again, it was something that I said put together just preparation for today. And I certainly would welcome an opportunity to come back as well and sort of talk about the interconnection of the various modernization efforts that we are currently working towards. Lisa mentioned in her review, we are looking at, we do have an active procurement right now for noticing. And when we think about, as Mike just said, like that, but that sort of the primary three, modules of an integrated eligibility system is we recognize that there are noticing solutions that can easily bolt onto an IES. But we do have, as we sort of think about the work that we've done over the last 7 years, is we have an immediate need right now for a project that is a noticing project because of the challenges and risks of our current noticing server. And that's where sort of in the middle there is it kind of talks about the timeline. But the key takeaway I want to show here is there is work that we're doing right now to our legacy systems and that need to happen to still provide services, knowing that it will be integrated with VTIEs, with our IES in the coming years as well. So that's really the main key takeaway from here is it shows that we are doing a project right now in noticing. We are doing a project right now which kind of touches on, Lisa mentioned the application process of uploading like a PDF of an application, which is what we did for the Medicaid for age blind and disabled, which was a critical delivery of improvements for Vermonters to still have benefits during the pandemic. But now to be in compliance with CMS, our federal partners, we need to actually make an adjustment to that to bring it as a full application that actually feeds into the database essentially. So we're doing some work right now for that procurement work. And also we need to make sure that even with VHC, with Vermont Health Connect, that system is still in compliance as well. So we are still doing work in those legacy systems while we are doing VTIEs because we understand VTIEs based on the scope and the complexity of this procurement. It's not going to be delivering outcomes next week. But Vermonters' needs today, tomorrow, and next week are here right now. So again, the key takeaway here is really showing you that, just highlighting 3 procurement efforts right now that they will integrate with VTIEs in the coming years as well. The key takeaway is, in addition to VTIEs, is really highlighting this phased release of functionality. We're currently in, as Mike mentioned, we're wrapping up the RFP. We've already engaged with our federal partners. We're making some revisions based on their feedback, which have been very positive, and we're still moving forward to make those adjustments to the RFP to then actually, with the goal of sending it back to get federal approval and then ultimately release it to our vendor community. We recognize the timeline of what that looks like for those procurement activities, the independent review that Lisa mentioned, the contracting, the selecting the vendor. I said all that backwards, but all those activities that need to happen. But then when the vendor gets on board, that's when we really look at the 3 to 4 year timeline of phased release of activity, of phased release of improvements through the design, development, and implementation. So that's the blue shading into green that I'm trying to showcase here on this chart. But then recognizing the integration of noticing, the integration of sort of a document uploader experience as part of a portal, recognizing that IE&E is, oversees a variety of programs for economic services and also healthcare, but also qualified health plans as well, which will ultimately replace BHC. So I think when we look at this, and the thing I do want to call out is the journey over the last 12 months is recognizing, doesn't matter how good the RFP is, it doesn't matter if no one responds to it. And Mike's comment earlier was when we did go to the conference it was in Maryland last year, there were vendors that had no interest in even engaging with Vermont. We had states that didn't even want to talk to us. So I've been incredibly focused over the last 12 months to really be fully transparent with our external stakeholders, with Lisa, with leadership within ADS and also AHS, in terms of this is what we know today, what's missing. This is what we know today, what's missing. And also sending those communication updates out to our vendor community so that they know where we are, they understand the process that we're going through. The point I'm really trying to achieve is when the RFP is released, that they're not surprised because we've been adequately informing them consistently about the process that we've gone through. In the last 12 months, we've released 3 RFIs and we've got feedback back from the vendor community in terms of validating our approach. what's missing, what information would they like to know about, what questions have they got. In April, part of the RFI 3 that we released was actually, we had 8 vendors perform an online virtual demonstration of their solution. And I call that out because they were all these prime vendors. So that confirmed that the approach that we're moving towards was a sound one. We also did a cost benefit analysis, which actually also highlighted the various opportunities that we could take for modernization and confirmed the approach that we were going with was the most advantageous one. But the key takeaway is we went from vendors not wanting to talk to us to we had 8 vendors go on the record in a virtual presentation illustrating their solution in something that was recorded and is now subject to Freedom of Information Act, which I think really showcases the fact that we've got some vendor engagement, that they really are interested in what Vermont is doing. They understand what some of the challenges that we've had, and they invited me to even present to their advisory group at the conference most recently in Orlando. So we have a really positive relationship with the vendor community, which I think is something that we hadn't quite had before. And what was quite shocking to me was even going down to the conference, the vendor response was one where they wanted to call out that very few states actually have that kind of outreach and transparent communication with them. So I think that that's really, a critical part of what's different today in terms of the approach with this modernization work. But in terms of VTIES as this project, as in terms of what I can share with you with where we are right now, is really understanding that the premise of the IES, or the Integrated Eligibility Enrollment Program, is to ensure at the end of the day that Vermonters have a simple and easy way to apply and access healthcare and also economic assistance benefits without gaps in this coverage. That we can in fact deliver those using, being efficient and sustainable with the technology. And knowing that evolution, that modernization continue, because we need to make sure that once we build this new system, that we maintain it and make improvements. And I think that the modular approach will allow us to not let it sit and get to where it was, kind of where we are with access, as an example of a legacy system, is making sure that we can continue to support Vermonters by making sure that we can do those improvements. All of those modernization efforts are going to continue because of compliance, because of federal regulation, because of HIPAA compliance, and ultimately making sure that we are delivering the best experience for Vermonters and state staff. So I think that is all the information that I wanted to present today. Again, I know it was kind of condensed, and this is just, there's a lot I could certainly talk about, like the various projects that we have delivered over the last several years. That is part of a broader IE presentation that I'm working to develop. But I'm certainly hoping that this provides a bit of an insight as to the work that we've done over the last 12 months to hopefully to provide some more clarification to support Lisa's assessment of where we are today compared to 12 months ago. And certainly I'm happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate the time.
Let's start. Can you identify a couple of the key lessons learned from the previous iterations of this project that will ensure that this version meets with success where perhaps previously it might not have?
I think absolutely. I think one of the initial ones, the critical call out is not dictating an implementation solution or mandating a process to implement their solution in a way that we think makes the most sense. So I think that really has, in terms of the RFP development process, we've been really focused on outcomes, which I think is a pretty significant shift compared to previous procurements, where we've been incredibly detailed as to what we think we want versus this is what we need to deliver. How does your solution meet those needs? I think that's probably one of the key takeaways, is really focusing on outcomes, which has helped us really ground our focus on really ultimately the people that we're servicing. Or serving is probably the better use of word there, is, our Vermont citizens, but also recognizing our state staff are also citizens as well, but that they are a really critical part of a stakeholder group that we need to focus on. It's not just making sure that we improve outcomes for Vermont citizens. It's recognizing the people that show up to work each and every day and provide those services. So I think that's probably the number one. Mike, do you think?
I was gonna say, I think compared to 2014, if you ask anybody what integrated eligibility and enrollment actually meant, I don't think anybody can answer it. It was kind of like a make-believe thing that wasn't really developed yet. And I think the vendor community now has got a really good grasp on what states are looking for in a solution. Thinking about a fully online interaction, that's come a long way from 2014 to now. And I think that in itself is changing the roadmap, and the engagement that the program's done so far with vendors that help keep us in check of the direction we were going is going to be instrumental to where we're going. But our RFP was formed on a lot of that advice. And I think in the past, the team was very closed-doored on wanting to share information or the plans of strategy of how they want to go about it, because they were so worried about cost allocation discussions, CMS funding discussions. And I think this outreach to the vendor community is really what's instrumental for us to move forward.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think it's the lesson learned that I actually identified most recently at the conference in September was that the challenges that we have with our mainframe, with our legacy systems, are not unique. Every state has legacy systems with a workforce that is retiring, has a level of expertise that they don't have. I also recognize that what we are searching for is not unique. When we talk about these outcomes of a user-friendly online experience, support Vermonters, access to benefits that are seamless and holistic, without coverage gaps, what we're asking for is not unique. I've said this several times, probably to the point of my team being annoyed, is I refuse to believe that we have all that special. What we are looking for does exist. What we're looking for is not complicated. Well, the outcomes are not complicated. They are something that we can grab onto and recognize. And when I heard from other states who certainly recognize the challenges that they've had with a remote workforce, with staffing challenges, resource challenges, I'll talk broadly, right? In terms of vacancies and trying to get people to do the work, having people available in the state to do the work as well, is really highlighting the need to be efficient in the work that we're doing with the resources that we do have available to us, using a system that provides the best service. But the problems that we've had with our the procurement history for Vermont, truth be told, is not unique. And that was the key takeaway that I learned. And I presented with this presentation I gave to the vendor community. I took some slides out because I also like to keep things somewhat, lighthearted in terms of the challenges that we've had in Vermont. They're not unique to Vermont. Some things are unique, sure, but the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and trying to search for are not. But certainly what we have heard from other states, and we've engaged with many states in these RFI efforts, requests for information, is recognizing the importance of transparency and communication and the role of OCM in managing the program, which is in essence my approach to the work that I do each and every day, but also the role of OCM in the project itself, to make sure that there's broad communication, awareness of the work, that there's satisfactory training to help people gain the knowledge and also retain that knowledge and also deliver that new service to Vermonters in a way that will be successful. Doesn't matter how great the solution is if no one can use it. And I think we've all experienced that when we buy a new car or a new appliance. If we don't know how to use all the features, it doesn't really make much of a difference. But we need to make sure that it ultimately delivers the outcomes that we're looking for. So I think it's really leading, for me personally, leading from a point of people first has really been a primary lesson learned. I think that's really been benefiting the program. Good deal.
Any last questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I feel slightly optimistic. I mean,
Is it to say that about
yeah, so I mean, it would be great to just have, another update, other updates.
Sure.
Well, I don't like talking, so.
So,
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time today. And I think it's it's great to hear optimism because I think.
slightly.
Yeah, I will take that too. Look, I think the work that we're doing is we're in a really good position, and I think the assessment is a fair one from Lisa and her team. And I think the engagement moving with Mike and myself and working with Secretary Hughes and Secretary Samuelson is we're moving in the right direction and we're making progress, which is fantastic. So I look forward to ongoing communication with you.
I'm encouraged as well. Somebody hasn't thrown a blank
Absolutely.
to some extent. And just the one thing in terms of future concerns, and I hope that this is something that is due diligence regarding vendor selection. Depth of that due diligence. The notion of continuing due diligence because things change, particularly in terms of IT projects that go on for a period of time. We've had certain experiences here in Vermont in terms of vendors, for example, and we've had vendors whose due diligence looked good but weren't telling us the truth. We've had some very specific. We had one I remember going back a number of years in which a vendor came to a group of people and showed a black box with lights on it, and there was nothing behind it. But there was supposed to be. I mean, and it's just that issue of due diligence and sort of a continuing suspicion that I hope that you're applying to the vendors that you select to do this work.
Absolutely. I'm the first one to recognize that vendors will tell me whatever it is that makes me feel good. And if they say great communication and outreach, great work, Lamont, you're doing something we've never seen before. I understand that there is an element of marketing that's involved. But my approach, I think, is if we can have constant outreach and communication and transparency with vendors and states, and within various agencies as well, is that we can ensure that we keep an eye on that as well, because I think that's going to be really critical. It doesn't matter how shiny it is, it needs to ultimately deliver behind the black curtain as well.
Plus, we know what we want now. I think it's easier to hold a vendor to task when you're able to communicate what you want out of a solution versus having them tell you what you want in your solution, right? So I think the work that we've done in the engagement of vendors upfront, across vendors before we even issued a procurement, to know that we propose to them where we envision us going. And we've had multiple vendors say, yeah, you guys are on the right track, so that we validated where we want to go. And now we're ready to say, okay, now let's pick the best vendor to get us to where we want to go. We're holding them to task on our deliverable.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, while we've been engaged with our vendor community, we've also been heavily engaged with our federal partners with CMS and FNS. And we've identified 25 CMS mandatory outcomes, which really, I think, will holds vendors accountable that their solution delivers outcomes that have been established. It kind of gets back to these standards that Lisa was referring to, that these CMS required outcomes are delivered because those are going to be outcomes and metrics that we'll be using to hold the vendor accountable for their solution. We've also identified 5 state-specific outcomes as well to be holistic of FNS and CMS. FNS has also got a systems integrity review tool, which also really helps us identify, does the solution meet the needs and the outcomes that we've identified? So making sure that, and we've included all that information in the RFP to ensure that a vendor solution is more than just bells and whistles, and it actually does deliver those outcomes. But I certainly appreciate your guidance. Thank you very much.
Just for you, Mr. Chair, I do want to come back to the question afterwards of resources, human resources and staffing, including potentially on this project. I'm assuming Secretary Riley Hughes will be able to
just for awareness, we had planned on ERP this morning. We're going to push that to this afternoon so we can keep lunch on schedule in case folks have meetings. Any last minute questions, concerns, points of interest? Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And we'll adjust the schedule for this afternoon as needed. We've got some time set aside for committee discussion. So if we need to compress that in order to make room for ERP questions, we will. I'd like to leave some time at the end to discuss our next